Every ranger has a story they refuse to put in the report. This is mine. And after tonight, you'll understand why. My name is Sam Harper, and I'm a 32-year-old park ranger. I love the outdoors and have always been drawn to the peace and beauty of nature. That's what led me to this job, working as a ranger in some of the most scenic state and national parks across the country. I grew up in a small town in rural Pennsylvania. Money was always tight for my family. My dad worked in construction, and my mom waited tables at the local diner. I was a decent student, but college wasn't really an option. We just couldn't afford it. So after high school, I wasn't sure what to do with myself. That's when I came across an ad for seasonal park ranger positions. It seemed like the perfect fit, a chance to spend my days in the great outdoors while earning a steady paycheck. I applied immediately, and a few months later, found myself starting my first ranger job at a state park in North Carolina. That was over 10 years ago. Since then, I've worked as a ranger in parks across Michigan, Oregon, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. I love the variety, from the lush forests of the Pacific Northwest to the rugged coastline of the Great Lakes. Each park has its own unique character and challenges. But I've come to learn that being a park ranger isn't just a walk in the woods. This job comes with real dangers, especially when you're posted in remote areas, far from backup or support. I've dealt with everything from lost hikers to angry bears to illegal poachers. You always have to be on your guard out here. Lately, I've been stationed at a national forest in Oregon, and something about this place feels different. There's an eerie stillness to these ancient woods, a weightiness I haven't felt before. The locals speak in hushed tones about strange happenings in the forest's depths. I've tried to dismiss it as silly superstition and campfire tales, but now I'm not so sure. It started a few weeks ago when a group of campers went missing. A young couple and their 5-year-old daughter. They were only supposed to be out for a 2-day trip, but they never returned to their campsite. We organized a search party but found no trace of them. It was like they vanished into thin air. Since then, there have been other unsettling incidents. Park guests reporting glimpses of pale figures darting between the trees, inhuman shrieks echoing from the woods in the dead of night. And then the bodies started turning up. I keep telling myself there has to be a rational explanation. Wild animals or maybe a transient killer stalking the park. But in my gut, I know it's something more, something ancient and evil lurking in the forest. I can feel its malevolent presence watching me, waiting. As I set out on patrol this morning, a dense fog swallows the trails. An icy tingle runs up my spine, as if cold fingers were brushing the back of my neck. I get the distinct feeling I'm being lured deeper into the woods, drawn toward an unseen threat. But I have a job to do. I must push forward into the waiting trees and unravel the mystery that haunts this forest, before it claims me as its next victim. The morning fog seems to grow thicker with each step I take along the shadowed trail. Gnarled tree branches claw at me from both sides, dripping with cold condensation. Recent rains have turned the path into a muddy quagmire that sucks at my boots. As I pick my way deeper into the forest, my mind drifts back to the series of unsettling events that have plagued the park. The missing campers, the eerie sightings, the mangled bodies. I still can't make sense of what could be responsible. I keep a careful eye on the surroundings as I walk, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. In a place like this, danger could take many forms. We have black bears, cougars, even the occasional wolf passing through. But the seasoned outdoorsman in me doubts this is the work of an animal. The attacks have been too calculated, too vicious. Could it be a deranged killer stalking the woods? Some kind of backwoods psychopath using the vast wilderness as his personal hunting ground? As much as I hate to consider the possibility, it might almost be preferable to the alternative that has begun to take root in the back of my mind, an explanation I don't dare give voice to. A twig snaps in the undergrowth nearby, and I wheel around, my hand instinctively darting to the bear spray on my belt. But there's nothing there. Only mist and shadows and the thick tangle of forest. The fog seems to distort sounds, making it impossible to pinpoint their source. I force myself to take a deep breath and keep walking, my senses on high alert. I have to stay focused on the task at hand. Today, I'm hiking out to the site where the most recent body was discovered, a grisly scene that I know will haunt me for years to come. We found the mangled remains just off a remote section of trail deep in the backcountry. One of my fellow rangers stumbled across the grisly spectacle 3 days ago while on a routine patrol. He hasn't been the same since. I quickened my pace, eager to put this macabre errand behind me. It's never easy seeing the aftermath of so much violence, but I keep reminding myself that every scrap of evidence could be vital in preventing future victims. Though I have to wonder if I'm not chasing my tail with this investigation. Some things in this world defy logical explanation. Ancient things, dark things, that have lurked in the shadows since long before mankind drew its first breath. What if there are certain mysteries we're simply not meant to unravel? Before I can contemplate it further, I spot something through the drifting mist ahead that makes me stop in my tracks. A flash of color that doesn't belong, stark against the endless shades of green and brown. At first, I think it's just a piece of litter, maybe a discarded candy bar wrapper. But as I draw closer, I can make out the distinctive pattern of a baby doll's polka dot dress. My blood turns to ice in my veins. This deep into the wilderness, there shouldn't be any children's toys. Someone or something placed this here, marking the scene of an unspeakable crime like a predator, leaves a torn carcass as a warning to all who trespass on its territory. With a rising sense of dread, I slip off my pack and root around for an evidence bag. But even as I gingerly collect the doll, I already know that when I return to check the missing persons database, I'll find it matches the description of the toy last seen, clutched in the hands of a 5-year-old girl, a girl whose disappearance I'm powerless to solve. I put in a long day confirming the worst. The doll's polka dots match those worn by the young missing girl in her last known photo. Consulting torn missing posters back at the ranger's station leaves a bitter taste in my mouth. The smiling face is a cruel contrast to the grim reality of their fate. With more questions than answers, I drag myself back to the rustic shack I call home just as the sun begins to dip below the horizon. The old timber-framed cabin has seen better days, but its remoteness is one of its greatest attributes, nestled deep amidst the towering pines. The weathered porch boards creak beneath my weight as I trudge up the front steps, dust off my mud-caked boots, and head inside. The place is furnished sparsely, little more than the basic necessities, but it suits me fine. My few prized possessions are the reminders of my adventures across the country: a collection of pine cones, a framed photo from pictured rocks, a walking stick carved from Oregon driftwood. After a simple dinner, I settle down at the wooden table to work on my incident report and reluctantly add to my growing collection of case files. On the wall is a corkboard where I've mapped out the strange occurrences, trying desperately to find a pattern that will lead to answers. But the more I stare at the threads and pins, the more my mind begins to stray to darker possibilities. My thoughts are interrupted by a sudden scrabbling sound from the front porch, a frantic scratching like nails on the old wood. I tense, my hand slipping under the table toward the sidearm that never leaves my side out here. Heart thumping in my chest, I ease off the safety and approach the front windows. But when I peer out through the glass, there's nothing there. Just the first shadows of night creeping across the clearing. Must have been a raccoon or something, I think, as I slide the pistol back into its holster. I've just settled back into my chair when I hear it, a loud bang from the rear of the cabin that reverberates through the walls. This time, I draw my gun and fly out of my seat toward the back door. But again, when I throw it open and step cautiously into the night with my weapon ready, I'm met with only stillness and the hooting of a distant owl. The old generator that powers the cabin chugs along steadily, oblivious to my paranoia. Even so, I can't shake the crawling sensation of being watched, stalked like prey, of something lurking just beyond the feeble light spilling from the cabin windows, waiting for the perfect moment to... A shrill ring pierces the silence, and I nearly jump out of my skin. It's coming from inside, the HT radio. With a curse, I hurry back in and snatch up the receiver. "Ranger Harper," I bark, my voice tense. A burst of static greets me, and I have to strain to hear the frantic voice on the other end. It's another ranger, a buddy of mine named Ramirez, who's out on night patrol. "Need backup. Something coming. Not alone out here." His words are swallowed by white noise, but the fear in his voice is unmistakable. A chill races down my spine. "Say again, your last transmission was garbled. What's your location?" I grip the radio tightly, my knuckles white. More static. Then Ramirez's voice, edged with panic. "Campground. Hurry!" My heart in my throat, I race to my Jeep. I peel out of the cabin's gravel driveway and speed off into the night. Gravel spraying behind my tires, a prayer on my lips that I'm not too late. But there's a sinking feeling deep in my gut that knows I am. That I'm already too late for all of us. I white-knuckle the steering wheel as I speed down the dark and winding Forest Service road. The Jeep's headlights cutting a feeble swath through the dense trees that press in from all sides. The radio crackles with static. Ramirez's desperate pleas still echoing in my mind. He sounded terrified, in a way I've never heard from the seasoned ranger before. Ramirez is one of the toughest guys I know. A former Army Ranger who's faced down everything from grizzly bears to armed poachers without flinching. What could have rattled him so badly way out here? Deep down, I already know the answer. It's the same dark presence I felt stalking me through the trees, the same ancient evil that's been preying on the innocent in these woods, and now it has Ramirez in its sights. As I fly around a sharp bend, the Jeep's tires skidding on the loose gravel, I spot the sign for the remote campground where Ramirez made his distress call. I take the turnoff and gun the engine, my high beam sweeping across the scattered RV lots and tent sites. Everything looks eerily still and quiet. No sign of the usual campfire revelry or late-night marshmallow roasts. A few tendrils of mist slither between the hulking shapes of parked campers and trailers. I pull up next to Ramirez's Forest Service truck, and my headlights glint off the green paint. The driver's side door hangs open, swaying gently in the breeze. I hop down from my Jeep with my flashlight in one hand and my gun in the other. "Ramirez!" I call out as I approach his vehicle. No response, only the hush of the towering evergreens. A quick sweep of my light through the cab reveals no signs of a struggle, just a still steaming cup of coffee in the cup holder and a dog-eared Louis L'Amour paperback on the passenger seat. But no Ramirez. I spin in a slow circle, my light cutting through the fog. "Ramirez, where are you? Talk to me, buddy." In the distance, a twig snaps, and I whirl toward the sound, my heart jackhammering against my ribs. I probe the darkness with my flashlight, but the beam is swallowed by the murky forest almost immediately. Cursing, I fish my powerful spotlight from the Jeep and try again. This time I catch a glimpse of movement between the trees, a flash of pale skin and dark hair. "Ramirez, is that you?" I plunge into the woods after the figure, adrenaline surging through my veins. I call his name again, but the only response is my own voice echoing back to me. Branches claw at my face and arms as I crash through the underbrush, thorny tentacles pulling at my clothes. But I barely feel them, too focused on the darting shadow I'm chasing. After a few minutes, I burst into a small clearing and stop short, disoriented. The figure I was pursuing is nowhere to be seen. I pan my spotlight around the clearing, the bright beam starkly illuminating pale tree trunks and dancing over emerald ferns. That's when the smell hits me, an overpowering metallic tang that fills my nostrils and coats my tongue, the coppery scent of fresh blood. My light catches on something wet and dark splattered across the leaves carpeting the forest floor. With rising horror, I follow the trail of blood, straight to a crumpled form half hidden behind a fallen log. "No, no, no," I mutter, as I rush over and drop to my knees beside the body. I already know what I'll find, but it still hits me like a punch to the gut when I roll him over, and Ramirez's sightless eyes stare back at me. His throat has been brutally torn out, ragged flesh glistening in the harsh glare of my spotlight. Blood is everywhere, black in the colorless light, soaking into the ground. I'm too late. The thing in the forest claimed another victim while I was bumbling around in the dark. Icy tendrils of fear wrap around my chest and squeeze until I'm gasping for breath. Because I know I'm next. I barely feel the twigs and branches tearing at my skin as I stumble back through the woods, my heart galloping in my ears. My spotlight sweeps erratically across the swallowing darkness, but the menacing trees seem to shift and close in around me from every side. It's only once I've crashed back into the campground, Ramirez's blood still on my boots, that I pause. Head darting like a spooked deer, I scan the silent campsites for an unfathomable horror lurking between the hulking RVs. But nothing leaps from the shadows to finish what it started in the glade. Chest heaving, I yank open the door to Ramirez's truck and lunge for the radio with a trembling hand, nearly knocking over the coffee in my haste. "This is Harper, badge 4720, requesting immediate assistance at the Iron Creek campground," I shout into the receiver, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I've got a ranger down, repeat, ranger down." But the radio answers only with a static hiss, the familiar tones replaced with an ominous electric screech. It's the same maddening white noise that swallowed Ramirez's final pleas for help. Cursing, I slam down the receiver and rake my fingers through my hair. A wave of helplessness washes over me. I've never felt so cut off, so gut-wrenchingly alone, staring down a faceless terror that grows bolder with each exsanguinated body. How can you even begin to fight a malevolent force you can't reason with or predict? "Get a hold of yourself," I mentally snarl. "You're not some clueless kid lost in the big bad woods. You're a goddamn park ranger with years of training and experience under your belt. Years spent honing yourself into a weapon that can take on anything nature throws at you. So man the hell up and figure out your next move." With a steadying breath, I force down the panic scrabbling up my throat and focus. Assess, plan, act. Just like they drilled into us at the academy. Assess. Ramirez is dead, savagely killed by whatever is hunting in these woods. Same as the other victims. Based on the sheer brutality of the attacks, I'm guessing the ranger who found the last body wasn't exaggerating when he talked about it looking more animal than human. Some kind of vicious predator, more beast than man. Or maybe even some freakish combination of the two. No, don't let your imagination run wild with ghost stories. And I don't remember the drive back to my cabin, my mind lost in a fog of shock and horror, as thick as the mist wafting between the pines. It's a small miracle I make it in one piece, the way my hands shake on the wheel. All I can see is Ramirez's lifeless eyes staring up at me from the blood-stained forest floor. All I can hear is the wet, tearing sound his flesh made as I examine the gaping wound where his throat used to be. It's the stuff of nightmares, the kind of grisly scene that permanently etches itself into your psyche. But I know if I'm not careful, I'll be starring in the next gut-churning tableau. I'm the only thing standing between this thing and more innocent victims. By the time I stumble through my front door, a plan is already taking shape. I make a beeline for the radio and put in an urgent call to the district ranger station to report Ramirez's death, my voice hoarse and hollow, even to my own ears. I leave out any details I can't explain, like the unnatural stillness of the forest or the static on the radio. No point in making them question my sanity, at least not yet. That task complete, I methodically set about turning my humble shack into a fortress. I check and double-check every lock, drag a heavy dresser in front of the back door, upend the kitchen table against the windows as a barricade. Meager protection against the kind of raw savagery I witnessed tonight, but it makes me feel a little less exposed, a little less like a mouse cowering in its hole. Next, I break out my arsenal, laying out an array of weapons across the scarred floorboards. I'm not technically supposed to have some of this stuff, but I never was much for blindly following regs, not when they could get me killed. The Glock is familiar and reassuring in my hand as I slot a full mag and rack the slide. On the coffee table, I line up my 12-gauge shotgun, my hunting rifle, and the big .44 Magnum revolver I keep for the rare grizzly that gets too bold, all oiled and gleaming in the yellow lamplight. Shells, slugs, and cartridges neatly sorted into piles. I'm under no illusions that this will be enough. But damn it, I'm going to go down fighting against this thing. This twisted predator that wears human skin but has no shred of humanity. And if I'm being honest with myself, a part of me is itching to face it head on, to stare into its dead eyes and show it that Sam Harper's no easy meal. I've always been drawn to danger, addicted to the rush of adrenaline that comes with pitting yourself against nature's crueler creations. But this is something else entirely. A soft scuffling sound from the porch makes me freeze, one hand white-knuckled on the Glock. My eyes dart to the window, searching the darkness for a glimpse of something pale and grinning with too many teeth. But when several tense seconds tick by with no further disturbance, I force myself to relax fractionally. Just the damn raccoons again, I tell myself, probably drawn by the scent of my fear-soaked sweat. To keep myself busy and sane, I flip open my dog-eared copy of Peterson's Field Guide to Eastern Forests and begin scouring the section on regional folklore and mythical beasts. If I'm going to figure out how to kill this thing, I need to know what I'm dealing with. There are tales from hikers of strange sightings and eerie noises in certain remote pockets of wilderness all over the country. Flitting shadows between trees, guttural growls no animal should make, the uncanny sense of being watched and hunted. But the stories I keep coming back to all seem to center on these woods. Our woods. Ancient legends from the local tribes about a malevolent spirit that takes the form of a man, its flesh as pale as moonglow, its mouth crowded with sharp fangs. A vengeful entity that emerges from the shadowed heart of the forest when the barrier between worlds grows thin, hungry for human prey. They called it the Wendigo. Looking at the old woodcut illustration of the emaciated figure with its sunken eyes and skull-like grin, a chill races up my spine. Is this the nightmarish thing I'm up against? A folkloric monster sprung to vicious life? As I pore over the scant description, a floorboard creaks behind me, a whisper of weight that makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. But before I can whirl around, an icy hand clamps down over my mouth and drags me into the darkness. Blind panic slams through me as I'm hauled up out of the chair, my scream smothered by cold, grasping fingers. I thrash and writhe against the strong grip crushing my arms to my sides, but it's useless. With an easy, almost casual strength, my attacker flings me across the room like a rag doll. I slam into the far wall and crumple to the floor, the breath driven from my lungs in a painful whoosh, bright lights bursting behind my eyes. Gasping and woozy, I struggle to push myself upright on trembling arms, but freeze when a pair of bare, bone-white feet step into my swimming field of vision. My gaze drags upward, taking in skin so pale it seems to glow, limbs elongated and emaciated but corded with ropey muscle, a skeletal torso with jutting ribs and not an ounce of fat. But it's the face that snares me like a rabbit in a snare, my hammering heart turning to ice in my chest. Because it's barely a face at all, just a lipless slash of a mouth in a nightmarish skull, crowded with glinting needle fangs that gnash together with an audible click, and the eyes, God, the eyes. Milky, pupilless orbs that bore into me with an ancient, ravenous hunger. The Wendigo, that folklore demon sprung to gruesome life, looms over me like something out of the deepest pits of hell. Its fetid breath washes over me, reeking of blood and rotted meat, of Ramirez's torn flesh caught between those snapping jaws. I scrabble backwards on my elbows, crab-walking until my shoulders hit the wall. My eyes dart wildly to my neat rows of firearms scattered across the floor, so nearby, yet impossibly out of reach with this thing between me and them. What do you want? I rasp out, my tongue dry as bone behind my chattering teeth. A ghastly, gurgling sound rises from its throat, a twisted approximation of human laughter that makes my skin want to crawl off my body. Slowly, almost tauntingly, it crouches down to loom over me, a taloned hand reaching out to caress my cheek with obscene tenderness. Hungry, it croaks, the single garbled word wrapped in a dozen hissing, overlapping voices. So hungry. And I know in that moment that I'm going to die in this lonely cabin, torn apart by this grotesque thing while it gorges on my still warm flesh, that the last thing I'll see is my own reflection screaming back at me from those hellish white eyes. Choking on a moan of horror, I tip my head back and squeeze my eyes shut, baring my throat to those gleaming fangs in terrified surrender. Tears leak from the corners of my eyes as I wait for the first piercing bite, the gush of hot blood down my neck. But the killing blow doesn't come. The cold fingers tracing my jaw flutter away. Cautiously, I crack open one eye. The Wendigo still crouches in front of me, but its attention is riveted on something over my head, the corkboard map with its pins and red-threaded trails. It cocks its monstrous head, a low growl building in its throat. Following its gaze, My heart stutters as I zero in on one of Ramirez's scrawled notes tacked next to a pin. The words, "abandoned root cellar," underlined twice in his bold hand. Of course, during construction of the park facilities ages ago, several old settler root cellars were discovered in the area and marked for historical preservation. Small underground spaces, reinforced with stone, naturally cool and dark. The perfect place for a creature like the Wendigo to hide from the punishing light of day. My mind races, frantically grasping at this revelation like a lifeline. If I can just get to one of those root cellars, block myself inside until the sun comes up or backup arrives, it's a desperate gamble. But the only play I've got left. Slowly, I slide one shaking hand behind me and wrap my fingers around a heavy glass ashtray, gathering dust on a low shelf. I've never been much for smoking, but Ramirez left the ugly thing here ages ago. Now I could kiss him for it. In one explosive motion, I lunge up and smash the thick glass against the Wendigo's temple with everything I've got. It screeches, more enraged than pained, but the impact sends it reeling back half a step. It's all the opening I need. I'm moving before the glass even hits the floor, my feet scrabbling for purchase on the dusty wood as I bolt for the door. I crash through it in a hail of splinters and fling myself into the Jeep, ashtray shards still glinting in my bloody fist. The engine catches on the first try, and I gun it with the headlights off, not daring to look back at the hellish silhouette undoubtedly framed in my doorway. I can only pray my memory of the paths holds true as I bounce over roots and ruts, every shadow threatening to leap at me with grasping claws. At last, through the spindly pines, I spot the heavy hillock of earth that marks the nearest root cellar. I skid to a stop and scramble from the Jeep, my boots slipping in the loose dirt as I claw at the ancient wooden doors. They creak open with a groan straight out of a horror movie, and I all but fall down the narrow steps into the cool, earthen darkness. The dank space is bare, but for a few rusty yard tools propped in the corner, it'll have to do. With the last of my strength, I heave the doors shut and throw the bolt, nearly weeping with relief when I hear it snick into place. I collapse against the packed dirt wall, shaking with exhaustion and ebbing terror. But as my eyes begin to adjust to the gloom, a new sound reaches my ears over the thunder of my pulse. A soft, wet, ripping noise, and a reedy whistling that might be a whimper. Slowly, I turn toward the back of the cellar and scream, because I'm not alone down here after all. Huddled against the far wall is the missing family of campers, or what's left of them. Their nude, savaged bodies are barely recognizable as human, flesh shredded and bones cracked open to get at the marrow. And crouched over them, its moon-pale back to me as it uses blackened claws to lift dripping gobbets of meat to its snapping jaws, is the Wendigo. It's been here all along, preparing its lair for a long winter. The scream dies in my throat as it turns, blood-slicked mouth splitting into a fiendish grin. Its milky eyes glitter with triumph and a terrible knowing hunger as it rises to its full, towering height. And as it stalks toward me, unhurried, almost lazily, I know I've just sealed my own fate, that I was herded here like a lamb to slaughter, a final sacrifice to sate a monster's bottomless gluttony. The monster takes a step toward me, then another, dried blood flaking from its grotesque claws. My mind screams at my legs to run, to flee, but terror roots me to the spot. I can only press myself harder against the cold earthen wall and pray this is all some horrible nightmare I'll soon wake from. But the budding pain in my chest as my lungs strain for air, the sickly sweet stench of death and decay filling my nostrils. It's all too real to be a feverish conjuring. The Wendigo's emaciated form blocks my only path to escape, trapping me in this dank pit with the grisly remains of its previous victims. Please, I stammer out through my chattering teeth, one arm thrown up before me in a pitiful attempt to ward off the approaching horror. Please, don't. The thing just cocks its head, baring its fangs in a soulless mockery of a smile. I have no way of knowing if it even understands my words, my pleas for mercy. If a being of such pure, remorseless evil is capable of anything approaching pity or reason. Fresh tears spill down my cheeks as it looms over me, its hollow eye sockets boring into my face. Is this what Ramirez saw in his final moments? Those same unholy stars, alight with ravenous glee as they drank down his dawning comprehension and bleeding terror. I squeeze my eyes shut, unable to bear the Wendigo's dead gaze for a moment longer. My lips move in a soundless prayer to a God that suddenly feels very far away. I don't bother begging for my life. I already know I'm a dead man. I can only pray that my end is quick, that this abomination doesn't spend too long savoring my screams and thrashing as it shreds me limb from limb. With dreamlike slowness, I feel those skeletal fingers wrap around my throat, tightening until the smallest trickle of air wheezes through my constricted windpipe. The bite of jagged nails into my flesh, piercing like icy needles. This is it. This is how it ends for me, just like all the others. But as I brace myself for those awful jaws to tear into my helpless body, the pressure at my neck suddenly vanishes. Startled, I open my eyes. The Wendigo has lurched back a step, its hands flying up to claw at its own throat. An unearthly shriek erupts from its lipless mouth, oscillating wildly in pitch and volume like a malfunctioning radio dial. It staggers, slashes gouged into the pallid skin of its neck, black ichor sizzling as it dribbles out. And embedded in the center of the wounds, still quivering, is a broken shard of glass from the ashtray I wielded against the fiend. I must have driven it into the monster's flesh when I made my desperate bid for escape. Hope surges through me like a shot of adrenaline. It's not much, but it's the first sign I've seen that this thing can be hurt, that it bleeds and feels pain like any living creature, that maybe it's not as all-powerful and invincible as the legends claim. Galvanized, I lunge for the pile of rusted tools in the corner, my fingers closing around the hefty wooden handle of an old axe. The Wendigo sees me moving and lets out a gurgling roar of fury, lunging at me with arms outstretched and teeth bared. I swing the axe in a silvery arc, catching the charging demon across the chest with the slightly dulled blade. It rears back with an ear-splitting howl, a spray of tarry blood splattering the dirt. Again and again, I chop at the flailing body, putting every ounce of my terror and revulsion behind each blow. The Wendigo's agonized shrieks take on a desperate, almost panicked edge as the axe finds its marks. Glancing blows open weeping gashes in its pale flesh, sending it reeling back on its heels. For a transcendent moment, I allow myself to believe that I just might survive this, that I might actually beat the devil that's haunted these woods for untold generations. But in my adrenaline-fueled frenzy, my foot catches on an exposed root and I go crashing to the ground, the axe flying from my grip to skitter away into the shadows. In an instant, the Wendigo is on me, one hand clamped around my throat as the other rears back with claws extended. This time, there will be no lucky reprieve. Its cadaverous face hovers inches from mine, its necrotic breath washing over me in a putrid wave. I thrash and writhe, but I'm like an insect caught in a steel trap, totally at the non-existent mercy of a pitiless predator. Glistening ropes of drool gather at the corners of the Wendigo's mouth as it salivates over its long-awaited meal. For a single, endless moment, we stare into each other's eyes, and I swear I see the faces of every victim it's consumed over the years, their ghostly visages screaming out from the depths of those milky orbs. "Hungry," it gurgles again, barely intelligible through the phlegmy rattle in its chest. "Starving." Then it lunges down, its gnashing jaws spreading impossibly wide as it aims for the frantic throbbing of my jugular. I hear the awful, wet pop. As my windpipe collapse, I feel the Wendigo's fangs pierce my throat, a white-hot explosion of agony as it rips through flesh and muscle. My scream is little more than a strangled gurgle as blood gushes over my chin, filling my mouth with the coppery taste of my own mortality. The creature makes a grotesque slurping sound as it gulps down my lifeblood in great greedy draughts. I can feel the strength leaching from my limbs with each swallow, my struggles growing weaker as a gray haze creeps in at the edges of my vision. So this is how it ends. I think dimly through the encroaching fog, drained and devoured by a nightmare-made flesh, just another missing person whose file will gather dust in a cabinet. Will they find my mangled remains down here eventually? Or will my bones lay intermingled with the rest of the Wendigo's victims for years to come, picked clean and gnawed? As the darkness swallows me, my last thoughts are of the forest, that ancient, eldritch wood that will keep its secrets for another generation, the thing that haunts its shadowed depths, left to slumber and hunt and feed, as it has for time immemorial. I was a fool to think I could best it, that one man with an axe and a handful of bullets could bring down something so primally savage. In the end, the Wendigo was simply higher on the food chain, the apex predator in its domain of moss and shadow. The cold is inside me now, the chill of the grave seeping into my core as more and more of my essence is drawn out through the ragged hole in my throat. I'm floating, drifting, little more than a guttering spark, slipping inexorably into the eternal night. Distantly, as if from underwater, I hear a resounding crash echo through the root cellar, shouts, scuffling, the unmistakable blast of gunfire. Blinding light washes over me in chaotic strobes, and I see a flurry of movement, dark shapes grappling and writhing. With an effort that feels Herculean, I manage to turn my head. The doors to the cellar have been thrown open, weak dawn sunlight and flashlight beams stabbing down into the fetid space. Rangers in tactical gear pour through the opening, rifles barking as they unleash a hail of lead into the Wendigo. The monster staggers under the onslaught, but stays horrifyingly upright, ichor spraying from countless wounds to splatter the walls. It lurches after the Rangers with single-minded bloodlust, arms outstretched and jaws snapping. For a moment I think it will reach them, that they'll be torn apart, just like all the rest, despite their body armor and automatic weapons. But one of them pulls a cylindrical device from his belt that I recognize with a thrill, an incendiary grenade. With a flick of the thumb, he arms it and lobs it directly into the Wendigo's chest. The creature looks almost comically surprised as it glances down at the spitting cylinder. Then the grenade detonates in a blinding flash and a deafening whoomph of igniting phosphorus. Gobbets of napalm-like gel splash across the Wendigo's pale hide, clinging and burning with a sinister hiss. It throws back its head and emits a soul-rending screech as it pinwheels its arms, cooking flesh sloughing from its bones like wax from a melting candle. The stench is horrific, charred meat and toasted marrow and something else, something utterly alien and unwholesome. The thing that has haunted my nightmares staggers drunkenly, engulfed in chemical fire hot enough to burn even its unholy flesh to ash. It takes one lurching step toward the Rangers, then another, before slowly toppling backwards and crashing to the ground, its limbs twitching spastically. Even as I fade, I feel a flicker of vicious satisfaction at the sight of the Wendigo's remains crisping and blackening, noxious smoke rising from its seared carcass. I hope that it can feel pain, that it suffers even a fraction of the terror and agony it inflicted on its countless victims as it passes from this world. Strong hands grip my shoulders, urgent voices filtering through the roaring static filling my ears. I'm being lifted, carried up out of that charnel pit into the weak light of an overcast dawn. The last thing I see before my eyes flutter shut is the sea of pines all around, their needled branches stretching to the flat gray sky. I know I should feel relief or triumph or joy at my 11th hour rescue. But all I can muster is a bone-deep weariness as the trauma surgeons work frantically over my ravaged body, trying to staunch the blood loss and suture my flayed throat. Because deep down, I know that no matter how far I run, no matter how many locks I throw or lights I keep burning, I'll never escape the Wendigo. Not really. It will always be out there in the darkest copses of the forest, watching and waiting. A primordial evil that cannot be killed, only temporarily subdued or sated. And now that I've seen it, now that I've felt its icy touch and stared into the abyss of its milky eyes, it will haunt me for the rest of my days. In every shadow, every dark corner, every nightmare, the Wendigo has marked me, tasted my blood and terror, carved out a place for itself in the deepest recesses of my mind, and it will be back for me someday, hungry. The sound of my boots crunching on the gravel was the only thing breaking the stillness of the night. I hadn't slept properly in days, maybe weeks. I'd lost track. It was the kind of job that wore you down without you even noticing. Sleep wasn't the problem. The things I'd seen were things nobody in their right mind should ever have to face, let alone admit to. I'm the deputy sheriff of Pine Ridge County, Wyoming, It's 2004, and this is about as middle of nowhere as you can get. The kind of place where people disappear and nobody asks questions because nobody's there to hear them. And if there were, well, they wouldn't bother asking anyway. I signed up as a deputy 3 years ago because the big city chewed me up and spat me out. Too much noise, too many people. This place, though, it was quiet, simple. Cows, fences, and tumbleweeds as far as the eye could see. Seemed perfect, except when it wasn't. You see, Pine Ridge had its secrets. People would come in asking about a lost hiker or a missing hunter. The official response? They got lost in the woods or must have had an accident. But I knew better. We all did. Sheriff Reeves had been here for 30 years. A tall, leathery man, with eyes that had seen too much. He never talked about the strange occurrences that plagued our county, but you could see it in the way he'd stare off into the distance, particularly when looking toward the eastern forest. Just focus on keeping the peace, he told me my first day. The rest will sort itself out. I didn't understand what he meant then. Now I do. The stories were passed around over cheap whiskey, always late at night when nobody wanted to admit they were spooked. Stories of things that moved too fast, too quiet for any normal animal. Old-timers like Vernon at the gas station would clam up mid-sentence when you'd ask directly. Tourist hikers reported strange sounds, like metal scraping against bone. Hunters would come back with less game than usual, muttering about feeling watched. It was October 17th, a Tuesday. The air had turned bitter cold practically overnight. Wyoming doesn't ease you into winter. It throws you headfirst into it. I remember checking the temperature gauge on my cruiser. 28 degrees. My breath clouded in front of my face as I made my rounds through the silent streets of our town center, if you could call it that. One diner, a general store, a bar, and a gas station. The bank only opened 3 days a week. I was sitting in my cruiser, sipping the worst gas station coffee Wyoming had to offer, when dispatch crackled over the radio. "Deputy, we got a call from the Jenkins farm. Couple of their livestock went missing. Can you check it out?" I sighed and tossed the coffee out the window. "Yeah, sure, heading that way." The Jenkins farm was about 20 minutes out, sitting on the edge of a forest that everyone in town avoided like the plague. No one ever said why, but you could feel it. A weird energy that made the hair on your arm stand up. The locals called it Devil's Wood. Some people said it was cursed. I wasn't superstitious, but I wasn't about to make that forest my regular hiking spot either. As I drove, the radio station faded to static. Normal for these parts. The mountains blocked most signals. But tonight, the static sounded different, almost like it was forming words. I switched it off, preferring the silence. The road to the Jenkins place was a winding dirt path that cut through empty fields. No street lights out here. Just my headlights cutting through an absolute darkness that seemed to press in from all sides. The kind of darkness that feels like it has weight, substance, presence. The full moon cast long shadows across the fields, making ordinary fence posts look like figures standing at attention. An owl swooped across my path, and I nearly swerved off the road. Jumpy. I'd been jumpy for weeks now, ever since I'd found those hikers in the North Pass. Their tent had been shredded, belongings scattered. We never found the bodies. As I pulled up to the Jenkins place, I could see Old Man Jenkins waiting by the barn, shotgun slung over his shoulder. "Deputy," he greeted me, the lines on his face deep with worry. "You're going to want to see this." Roy Jenkins was pushing 70, but he worked his land like a man half his age. His wife had died 10 years back, and his children had all moved away to cities with more promise than Pine Ridge could offer. He was alone out here, which made what I was about to see all the more disturbing. He led me to the back of the barn, where 3 cows lay in the grass, each torn to shreds in a way that no wolf or coyote could have done. It wasn't just that they were dead, it was the way they were killed. The rib cages were crushed like something massive had stepped on them, but there were no tracks, nothing but claw marks so deep they could have been made by a backhoe. I crouched down, feeling cold sweat drip down the back of my neck. "What the hell happened here, Jenkins?" He spat on the ground. "I ain't seen nothing, but I heard it. Big, fast, too fast, took them down like they were toys." I examined the carcasses more closely. The wounds were precise in a way that seemed almost methodical. Not the random savagery of a predator, but something almost intentional. And the blood, there wasn't enough of it. These animals had been drained. When did this happen? Last night, round midnight. Heard the commotion, grabbed my shotgun, but by the time I got out here, whatever did it was gone. He paused, looking toward the forest. Came from there, always does. I could feel that familiar churn in my gut, the one that told me I should walk away. But curiosity killed the cat, right? I'll check it out, I said, standing up. I'll take a look in the woods. Jenkins shook his head. You don't want to do that, deputy. Ain't no good comes from going in there. I'll be fine, I lied. I radioed back to dispatch, letting them know I'd be out of the cruiser for a bit, and headed toward the tree line, flashlight in hand. The woods loomed ahead, a black wall of tangled branches and ancient oaks that looked like they'd swallowed the sunlight whole. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, but I kept walking. A stupid cop trying to prove something to himself, I guess. Behind me, I heard Jenkins call out, "Don't go too deep. And whatever you do, if you hear it, don't run. It likes it when they run." The tree line stood like a barrier between two worlds. On one side, the relative safety of the Jenkins farm with its weathered buildings and familiar sounds. On the other, Devil's Wood, a place that seemed to exist in defiance of everything rational and known. I paused at the edge, looking back at Jenkins, who stood watching me, his shotgun now raised slightly as if ready. The old man's face was a mask of concern. He knew something. They all did, but no one ever said it outright. That's how Pine Ridge worked. The truth existed in the spaces between words, in the things left unsaid. "I'll check the perimeter," I called back, trying to sound professional. "Won't be long." Jenkins nodded, but didn't move. He would wait. My flashlight beam seemed too weak against the oppressive darkness of the woods. The trees here were old, gnarled things with bark like dried skin and branches that reached like arthritic fingers toward a sky they could never touch. The forest floor was covered in a thick carpet of leaves and moss that muffled my footsteps. The smell hit me first, a deep, earthy scent mixed with something rotten. Not the usual forest decay, but something sharper, more metallic. Like old blood. I followed what appeared to be a game trail, keeping the farm in sight behind me. The wind picked up, sending leaves skittering across my path. The temperature seemed to drop with each step I took deeper into the trees. My breath fogged in front of me, now visible even in the beam of my flashlight. About 20 yards in, I found the first tracks. Not animal prints, at least not from any animal I'd ever seen. They were deep impressions in the soft earth. Roughly circular but with strange protrusions, like five-toed feet ending in hooks rather than claws. And they were big, each print the size of a dinner plate. Whatever made these walks on two legs, I thought. The realization sent a jolt of fear through me. I knelt to examine them more closely. The edges were crisp, fresh. Whatever made these had passed through recently. I took out my phone to snap a picture, but the battery was suddenly dead, despite having been fully charged back at the station. Technology often failed around Devil's Wood, another one of those things everyone knew but no one discussed. I stood and continued following the trail, against my better judgment. The tracks led deeper into the forest, toward an area locals called the Hollow, a natural depression in the land where nothing grew, not even weeds. I'd heard stories about the Hollow since my first week on the job. Strange lights, unexplained sounds, animals found mutilated. About 10 minutes in, the air got thick, almost too heavy to breathe. My flashlight cut through the dark, but barely. That's when I heard it, branches snapping somewhere to my left. My hand dropped to my gun, but I kept walking. Could have been a deer, I told myself. Could have been anything. But it wasn't. I knew that the moment I saw it. The thing moved between the trees, a blur of fur and muscle, too fast for my eyes to make sense of. But it wasn't just fast. It was massive, bigger than any bear I'd ever seen, and its limbs moved in a way that made my skin crawl, like it wasn't put together right. I stood frozen, my hand still on my gun, but I knew shooting it wouldn't help. I caught only glimpses, a flash of something that might have been an eye reflecting my flashlight beam, but too high up for any normal animal. a shadow that seemed to bend and twist in impossible ways, the sound of something heavy dragging through the underbrush, and then silence, complete and absolute. Even the wind stopped. The forest held its breath, and so did I. A loud crash came from behind me, and I spun around, heart pounding in my throat. The trees groaned under the weight of something alive but barely visible. A shape, larger than life, darted between the branches, and before I could even raise my weapon, it was on me. I fired blindly into the darkness, praying that I hit something. But the shots just echoed uselessly through the trees. My back slammed against the ground, the wind knocked out of me, and all I could see were these massive claws slashing through the air. Pain exploded up my leg, and when I looked down, my right foot was gone. Just gone. Torn clean off like it was nothing. I screamed. Don't know if it was from the pain or the sheer terror of knowing that this thing, whatever it was real, and I was about to die. But then, just as quickly as it had attacked, it vanished back into the shadows. I lay there, bleeding out, staring up at the canopy of trees, wondering why I wasn't dead yet. Maybe it didn't finish me off on purpose, or maybe it just didn't care. Either way, I wasn't sticking around to find out. With whatever strength I had left, I crawled toward the sound of the road, praying Jenkins would find me. Every inch felt like an eternity. Blood soaked through my uniform, leaving a trail behind me that felt like a neon sign pointing right at my crippled body. I was leaving a signal for something I couldn't see but knew was watching. I remember looking back once. Through the trees I saw something standing upright. A silhouette against the darkness, motionless but somehow conveying menace in its stillness. It was observing me, studying my pain, my struggle, and I swear, though I couldn't see a face, I felt it smile. The forest seemed to close in around me as I dragged my mutilated body toward safety. The branches overhead formed patterns that looked like hands reaching down. The roots beneath me twisted like snakes, sometimes seeming to deliberately impede my progress. The whole forest felt alive, conscious, malevolent. I don't know how long I crawled. Time lost all meaning. But eventually I heard Jenkins calling my name, his voice distant but growing closer. I tried to shout back, but all that came out was a weak gasp. Still, somehow he found me. I remember the look on his face when he saw what was left of my leg. Not shock. He'd expected something like this, but resignation, as if he'd known all along that this would happen to someone eventually. Why not me? Don't look back, he whispered, as he helped me to his truck. Whatever you do, don't look back at the woods. Of course I did. And there it was again, that shape, that presence, standing at the edge of the tree line, watching. Jenkins saw it too. He muttered something under his breath, an old prayer perhaps, and drove us away from there as fast as his ancient truck could manage. The last thing I remember before passing out was Jenkins radioing ahead to the county hospital. Got another one, he said simply. Like the others. The others. There had been others. And no one had told me. I woke up in a hospital bed, leg wrapped up in enough gauze to make me look like a mummy. The first thing I saw was Jenkins sitting by the window, his shotgun propped against the wall. You're lucky, he grumbled, not looking at me. Damn thing left you alive. I stared at him, trying to process what he'd just said. What the hell was it? My voice was hoarse, throat raw from screaming. Jenkins turned to face me, his eyes colder than they'd been before. It ain't something from this world, deputy. Been here longer than you or me. Maybe longer than this land itself. I told you not to go in there. I didn't say anything. What could I say? I had my leg taken off by something I couldn't even describe, and the more I thought about it, the more ridiculous it all sounded. But it wasn't a joke. No punchline was coming to save me. The hospital room was small and sterile, the fluorescent lights too bright after the darkness of the forest. An IV dripped clear fluid into my arm, and a monitor beeped steadily next to me. Through the window, I could see the town of Pine Ridge, its streets empty in the early morning light, and beyond that, in the distance, the dark line of trees that marked Devil's Wood. How long have I been out? I asked, my mouth dry. 2 days, Jenkins replied. They had to take more of your leg. Infection, they said. But I know better. I looked down at the shape under the blanket, where my right leg should have been. The blanket lay flat from mid-thigh down. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't just missing a foot. Half my leg was gone. "Why didn't anyone warn me?" I asked, anger seeping into my voice. "About what's in those woods?" Jenkins sighed, a deep, weary sound. "Would you have believed us? We tried warning the others too. They all thought we were just superstitious country folk." He stood up, grabbing his shotgun. "Rest up, deputy. Sheriff's coming by later." As he reached the door, I called after him. "Jenkins, have you ever seen it clearly? The thing in the woods?" He paused, his hand on the doorknob. "Once, back in '87. Took my brother. What was left of him we buried in a closed casket." He didn't turn around. "No one who sees it clearly ever lives long enough to describe it. Consider yourself fortunate." After Jenkins left, a nurse came in to check my vitals. Her name tag read Valerie. She worked efficiently, avoiding eye contact. "How bad is it?" I asked as she adjusted my IV. "Dr. Marino will be in shortly to discuss your condition," she replied, her tone professional but distant. "Not the leg, the thing that did this to me. How many others has it gotten?" Her hands froze for just a second before resuming their work. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. Everyone in this town knows. How many others have come in like me, torn up by something in those woods?" Valerie glanced at the door, then lowered her voice. "3 this year. A dozen in the time I've worked here. Some didn't make it." She straightened up. "We don't talk about it. It's better that way." "Better for who?" I demanded. "For everyone," she said firmly, then left without another word. Dr. Marino arrived an hour later, a gray-haired man with glasses perched on the end of his nose. He explained the extent of my injuries in clinical terms: severed femoral artery, massive tissue damage, signs of an unknown toxin in my bloodstream that had necessitated removing more of the leg than initially planned. "Unknown toxin," I repeated. "Like venom?" "We've sent samples to the state lab," he said, not meeting my eyes. "But yes, similar to venom, though unlike anything we've seen before." "Doctor," I began, "what the hell is in those woods?" Dr. Marino removed his glasses, polishing them with the edge of his lab coat. "As your physician, I can only address your medical condition. What you encountered, that's a matter for local authorities." "I am the local authorities," I reminded him. "Then I suggest you speak with Sheriff Reeves. He's waiting outside." With that, Dr. Marino replaced his glasses and left. Sheriff Reeves entered moments later. He looked older than I remembered, the lines in his face deeper, his eyes more shadowed. He placed his hat on the foot of my bed and pulled up the chair Jenkins had vacated. "Hell of a thing," he said simply. "You knew," I accused. "You knew what was out there and you sent me anyway." Reeves didn't deny it. "Would you have believed me if I'd told you about what really lives in Devil's Wood? Would you have taken me seriously, or would you have thought I was just another crazy old hick?" He had a point, and we both knew it. I would have nodded politely while thinking he'd lost his mind. "So what is it?" I asked. "Honest truth?" "Nobody knows for sure. Been here as long as there's been a Pine Ridge County. Longer, according to the native folks who used to live here. They avoided that forest entirely." "But what is it? Some kind of animal?" Reeves shook his head. "Not an animal. Not as we understand them. It hunts, yes, it kills. But it's selective, deliberate. It doesn't just feed, it plays, studies, learns." He leaned forward. "And it's getting bolder." The sheriff told me then about the history of Devil's Wood, how the first settlers had lost children to it, how every few decades the attacks would increase in frequency and violence, as if the thing was going through cycles of hibernation and activity. How, in recent years, those cycles had become shorter, the attacks more frequent. "We've tried to stop it," Reeves said. "Back in '73, a group of men went in with rifles and dynamite. None came back. In '96, the Forest Service wanted to do a controlled burn. The fire wouldn't catch, just wouldn't burn. So everyone just accepts it?" I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. "What choice do we have? Move away? Many have. But some of us, this is our home, has been for generations. We've learned to live with it, to respect the boundaries. By feeding it hikers and tourists?" The accusation hung in the air between us. Reeves' eyes hardened. "We warn them, all of them. just like we warned you. Not our fault if they don't listen. The sheriff came by later, told me to take my time recovering and that he'd close the case as animal attack. I laughed at that one, a dark, bitter laugh that turned into a coughing fit. Animal attack? Sure, that's one way to spin it. But I wasn't in the mood to argue. It didn't matter what they called it. I'd never walk the same way again. As Reeves was leaving, I asked the question that had been gnawing at me since I woke up. Why didn't it kill me? It could have. Why let me live? The sheriff paused at the door. Maybe it wasn't hungry. Maybe it was curious. Or maybe, he hesitated, maybe it marked you. Some folks think it chooses certain people, watches them, studies them. For what? No idea. But those people, they never stay lucky for long. With that ominous statement hanging in the air, Sheriff Reeves left. I remained in the hospital for another week, learning the basics of living with one leg, dealing with phantom pain that felt like my missing foot was being crushed over and over, and trying to make sense of what had happened to me. Nights were the worst. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, convinced I could hear something scratching at the window, see shadows moving on the ceiling that didn't match the objects in the room. The nurses said it was trauma, PTSD from the attack. But I knew better. The thing from the woods. It had followed me here, not physically perhaps, but it had left a part of itself with me. A connection I couldn't sever as easily as my leg had been. And sometimes in those moments between waking and sleeping, I swear I could hear it whispering to me, calling me back to Devil's Wood, promising to show me the rest of its secrets, if I was brave enough to return. 2 months passed before I could limp my way back to the Jenkins farm. I had a crutch under my arm and a whole new appreciation for fear. The woods still stood, as ominous as ever, whispering dark secrets I no longer cared to learn. But that wasn't the end. Jenkins told me more cattle had gone missing, and this time the thing had come closer, right up to the edge of the barn. The claw marks on the doors were deeper than before. Whatever it was getting bolder, hungrier. I wasn't the only one who knew it either. The whole town had started whispering the same way they always had. Except this time, they weren't just whispers. They were warnings. Folks started packing up, leaving for good. Recovery had been a nightmare of its own, learning to walk with a prosthetic leg, dealing with the stares, the pity, the questions I couldn't answer truthfully. I'd been put on administrative duty. No more patrols for me. Just paperwork and answering phones at the station. Sheriff Reeves made it clear. What happened to me was officially classified as a bear attack, and that's all I was to say about it. But the nightmares continued. Night after night, I'd find myself back in those woods, dragging myself through the underbrush, while something watched from the shadows. Only in the dreams, I never made it out. The thing would toy with me, taking pieces bit by bit, a finger here, an ear there, until there was almost nothing left, and still, it wouldn't let me die. I started researching the history of Pine Ridge County, digging through old newspaper archives, looking for patterns. The attacks had been happening for generations, always explained away as animal attacks, tragic accidents, or people simply going missing. But reading between the lines, the truth was there if you knew what to look for. 1887, 3 lumberjacks found partially consumed near what would later be called Devil's Wood. 1924, a family of 4 disappears while camping, only their wagon and torn clothing discovered. 1956, 5 members of a hunting party go missing. The lone survivor commits suicide a week later, leaving a note that simply read, "It follows." 1973, the expedition Reeves had mentioned. 7 men enter the forest with weapons and explosives. None return. And more recently, a steady stream of hikers, campers, and tourists. Not all killed. Some just experienced close calls or reported strange sightings before leaving town in a hurry. And then there were the livestock mutilations, increasing in frequency over the past year. Something was changing. The pattern was accelerating. Whatever lived in those woods was becoming more active, more aggressive, and somehow I knew it wasn't finished with me. I visited the county library, where the oldest records were kept. The librarian, Miss Winters, was reluctant to help at first. But when I showed her my badge and mentioned I was investigating historical patterns of animal attacks, she relented. "There might be something in the town founder's journal," she said, leading me to a glass case containing a leather-bound book. Alexander Ridge's personal account of establishing the settlement in 1842. It's fragile, but I can let you view it here. Miss Winters carefully removed the journal and placed it on a reading desk. Just be gentle with it. It's one of our most valuable historical documents. The journal was written in faded ink, the handwriting ornate but legible. Most entries were mundane accounts of building cabins, planting crops, dealing with harsh weather. But then I found what I was looking for, dated November 1843. The native guides refused to take us beyond the Eastern Valley. They say the forest there is home to something they call the hunger that walks. Their superstition is frustrating our expansion efforts, though after what happened to Johnston's survey party, some of the men are beginning to share their fears. 3 good men lost. Their remains found in a condition I dare not describe here. Whatever animal is responsible must be hunted down. 2 weeks later, another entry. Our hunting party returned today, or what remains of it. Only Simmons and Carter made it back, both injured and speaking nonsense about a creature that walked like a man, but moved faster than any wolf. Carter took his own life this evening. Simmons refuses to speak of what they saw. The men are now refusing to go near the eastern forest. We will have to adjust our settlement boundaries accordingly. And finally, dated spring of 1844. We have come to an arrangement with what dwells in the eastern woods. So long as we respect its territory, it allows us to exist alongside it. This is not defeat, it is pragmatism. Some places are not meant for man. Some hungry gods predate our claims to this land. I closed the journal, my hands shaking slightly. Hungry gods. The founder of Pine Ridge had eventually recognized what they were dealing with wasn't an animal, wasn't something that could be hunted or driven away. It was something older, something that considered humans as little more than occasional prey or amusement. "Find what you were looking for?" Miss Winters asked, coming to collect the journal. "I'm not sure," I replied honestly. "Did Alexander Ridge write anything else about the eastern forest? Or this arrangement he mentioned?" Miss Winters carefully returned the journal to its case. "Not in any documents we have here, but there are stories, passed down through certain families. Old Ridge supposedly created some kind of pact, a boundary agreement, you might say." "What kind of pact?" She hesitated, glancing around the empty library. "The kind where sacrifices are made to keep the peace, livestock mainly. But in bad years," she trailed off. "In bad years, when winters were harsh and game was scarce, they'd send someone into the woods, usually a criminal or sometimes a volunteer who was old or sick, someone who wouldn't be missed." Miss Winters straightened her glasses. "But those are just stories, of course. Folk tales to frighten children. I would have believed that once, not anymore. Has anyone ever killed it, or tried to?" Miss Winters laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Every generation thinks they'll be the ones to end it, the ones who finally drive it away or destroy it. None have succeeded." She fixed me with a steady gaze. "It was you, wasn't it? You're the deputy who was attacked, the one who lost his leg." I nodded slowly. "Then you should know better than most. It can't be killed. It's been here since before us, and it'll be here long after we're gone." She leaned closer. "And if it marked you, if it let you live, then it isn't done with you yet." "What do you mean, marked me?" "Some say it chooses certain people, watches them, follows them, even away from the woods." Miss Winters glanced toward the windows, though from where we stood, Devil's Wood wasn't visible. "They say it gets inside your head somehow, makes you hear things, see things, draws you back. The nightmares, the whispers I sometimes thought I heard, the constant feeling of being watched." "What happens to those people?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "Eventually they go back to the woods, usually at night, usually alone." Miss Winters began reshelving books, signaling the end of our conversation. "They never come back out." As I left the library, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the town. In the distance, Devil's Wood was a dark line against the horizon, and for just a moment, I thought I saw something move among the trees, something tall and misshapen, watching me. But when I blinked, it was gone. That night, the dreams were worse than ever. I was back in the forest, but this time I wasn't running or crawling. I was walking deeper in, drawn by something I couldn't see, but could feel pulling at me like a hook in my soul. Ahead, in a clearing, stood a figure too tall to be human, its proportions wrong in ways that hurt to look at. It beckoned to me with a limb that was neither arm nor claw, but something in between. And the worst part? In the dream, I wasn't afraid. I was curious, eager even, as if reuniting with an old friend. I woke up to find myself standing in my kitchen, the front door wide open. I was fully dressed, my prosthetic leg attached, my car keys in my hand, sleepwalking. I'd been about to drive somewhere, and I had a sickening certainty about where. It was calling me back, and sooner or later I would answer. By December, things in Pine Ridge had reached a breaking point. 3 more hikers had disappeared near Devil's Wood. A child from the outskirts of town had vanished from his backyard, last seen walking toward the tree line. Livestock mutilations had become so common that farmers had taken to bringing their animals into barns at night and posting armed guards. The town was gripped by a silent panic. You could see it in people's eyes at the diner, in the hushed conversations that stopped when you approached, in the way everyone hurried indoors before sunset. Pine Ridge had always coexisted with the thing in the woods through an uneasy truce, but that truce was crumbling. And me? I was deteriorating too. The sleepwalking episodes had increased in frequency. Twice more I'd woken to find myself fully dressed, car keys in hand. Once I'd actually made it to my car before snapping out of it. The dreams had evolved. Now the thing in the woods was speaking to me, not in words exactly, but in concepts and images that burned themselves into my brain. It was showing me things, teaching me things, about itself, about the world, about what waited in the spaces between what humans could perceive. I would have joined the exodus of townspeople leaving for good if I could, but I couldn't. Something told me it wasn't over. Something told me that whatever it was still out there watching. And sooner or later, it had come back to finish what it started. Not today, though. I'm still here. Sheriff Reeves called an emergency town meeting in early January. The community center was packed. Those who hadn't already fled wanted answers, solutions, protection. Reeves looked haggard, his uniform wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. For generations, he began, his voice carrying across the hushed room, we've lived alongside what dwells in Devil's Wood. We've respected its territory, and in return, it's mostly left us alone. Angry murmurs rippled through the crowd. A woman stood up. My son is missing. You call that leaving us alone? It's different now, Reeves acknowledged. Something's changed. It's becoming more aggressive, more hungry. Then we need to kill it, someone shouted from the back. Others voiced their agreement. Reeves raised his hands for quiet. Many have tried. None have succeeded. Whatever this thing is, it's not something we can fight with guns and courage. Then what do you suggest? Jenkins asked from his seat near the front. We can't keep living like this. We've contacted state authorities, Reeves said. Told them we have an aggressive bear or mountain lion. They're sending wildlife officers next week. Laughter, bitter and disbelieving, rippled through the room. Everyone knew wildlife officers would be useless against what lurked in those woods. In the meantime, Reeves continued, no one goes near Devil's Wood. No one. We establish a perimeter, post guards if necessary. And if that doesn't work, someone called out. Reeves didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was heavy with the weight of what he was suggesting. Then we do what our ancestors did in times like these. We give it what it wants. Silence fell over the room. Everyone knew what he meant. The old stories, the old ways. A sacrifice. I sat in the back, watching, listening. The prosthetic leg chafed against my stump, a constant reminder of my own encounter. And as I sat there, a thought began to form. Not my own, but planted, seeded by the whispers that had invaded my dreams. I knew what had to be done. I knew why it had let me live. After the meeting, I approached Reeves. Sheriff, I need to talk to you, privately. He led me back to his office at the station, poured 2 glasses of whiskey, and sat heavily in his chair. I know what you're thinking, he said. I can see it in your face. It marked me, I said simply. It's been calling me back, and I think I'm supposed to go. Reeves downed his whiskey in one gulp. That's the worst idea I've ever heard. Is it? You were about to suggest a sacrifice, someone to appease it, like in the old days. Well, it's already chosen. It chose me. And you think walking into those woods to die is the answer? I think it doesn't just want to kill me. If it did, it would have finished the job that night. It wants something else. I leaned forward. And maybe, just maybe, if I go to it willingly, it will be satisfied, at least for a while. Reeves refilled his glass, his hand shaking slightly. You don't know what you're talking about. Nobody knows what this thing wants. That's what makes it so dangerous. I've been dreaming about it, I admitted, every night. It shows me things, and I think it's lonely. The sheriff stared at me. Lonely? You think a monster that's been terrorizing this town for generations is lonely? I didn't say it wasn't a monster, but I think it's also something else, something older, something that was here long before humans, that exists in ways we can't fully comprehend. And yes, I think it's lonely. Reeves shook his head. You've lost your mind. Maybe, I conceded. Or maybe it's been changing my mind. Preparing me. For what? I didn't have an answer to that, not one I could articulate. But I felt it, a certainty deep in my bones. I'm going back to those woods, Sheriff, tonight, alone. I can't let you do that. You can't stop me. Not unless you plan to lock me up. I stood up. And even then, it would just find another way, another person. This ends tonight, one way or another. Reeves looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. At least take this. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out an ancient-looking revolver. Family heirloom, bullets are silver. Won't kill it, probably, but might slow it down if you change your mind about this suicide mission. I took the gun, feeling its weight. Thank you, but I won't need it. As the sun set, I drove my cruiser to the edge of Jenkins's property. The old man was waiting for me, as if he'd known I was coming. Heard about your plan, he said, holding a lantern. Damn fool idea. Probably, I agreed, but I have to try. Jenkins nodded toward the dark line of trees. It's active tonight. Been hearing it moving around since dusk. Sounds excited. It knows I'm coming? Likely does. Jenkins handed me the lantern. Won't do much good in there, but take it anyway. You should go inside. Lock your doors. Jenkins chuckled darkly. Wouldn't make a difference if it decided to come for me, but I don't think it will. Not tonight. Tonight, it's waiting for you. I turned toward the forest, feeling a strange calm settle over me. The fear was still there, but muted now, buried beneath the certainty of what I had to do. Deputy, Jenkins called after me, if by some miracle you make it back out of there, tell us what you saw, what it really is. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and began walking toward Devil's Wood for what I knew would be the last time. The boundary between the open field and the forest seemed more defined than I remembered, like crossing from one world into another. The moment I stepped beneath the canopy of trees, the air changed, became heavier, charged with something like electricity. The temperature dropped noticeably, my breath fogging in front of me. I didn't need the lantern to guide me. I knew exactly where to go, as if following a map etched into my subconscious. Deeper and deeper I went, the underbrush growing thicker, the trees more twisted and ancient. Normal forest sounds, insects, small animals, the rustle of leaves, fell away, replaced by an unnatural silence. And then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound, like breathing, but not quite. Coming from up ahead, where the trees thinned into the clearing locals called the Hollow. I should have been terrified, should have turned and run. But the fear had been replaced by something else, a strange anticipation that I recognized wasn't entirely my own. It had been preparing me for this moment, conditioning me through dreams and whispers to accept what was coming. As I approached the edge of the hollow, I saw it waiting in the center of the clearing, no longer hiding in shadows or flitting at the edge of vision. It stood fully revealed in the moonlight, and my mind struggled to process what my eyes were seeing. It was tall, impossibly so, standing at least 9 feet. Its body was vaguely humanoid but wrong in proportions. Limbs too long, torso too narrow. Its skin, if you could call it that, seemed to shift between solid and translucent, revealing glimpses of an internal structure that resembled neither bone nor organ, but something in between. Where a face should have been was a featureless void that somehow conveyed expression, right now a kind of eager expectation. The revolver Reeves had given me felt heavy in my pocket, but I made no move to reach for it. It would have been useless anyway. I knew that now. This thing wasn't just physically present. It existed on multiple planes simultaneously, only partially manifesting in our reality. "I'm here," I said, my voice sounding strange in the unnatural silence of the hollow. "What do you want from me?" It didn't speak, not with words. Instead, images and concepts flooded my mind. I saw flashes of the past, Pine Ridge before it was settled, the forest extending for miles in all directions. I saw the first humans to encounter this being, their terror, their attempts to destroy it, to understand it. I saw the pact they eventually made, regular offerings of livestock, occasional human sacrifices in times of need. And I saw what it wanted now. Not just blood or fear or death. It wanted understanding, connection. After centuries of existence, it had grown curious about the creatures that kept encroaching on its territory. It had marked me not just as prey, but as a potential ambassador. The concept wasn't quite right, but it was the closest human equivalent. It extended a limb toward me, not the claw that had taken my leg, but something more hand-like, though with too many joints, too many digits, an invitation. I knew then what accepting meant. I wouldn't die, not exactly, but I wouldn't remain human either. I would become something in between, a bridge between worlds. Part of me would live on in this forest, merged with the entity before me, and in exchange, Pine Ridge would be safe again. The attacks would stop, the uneasy truce restored. Was it worth it? Sacrificing myself, my humanity, to save a town that had kept secrets from me, that had essentially fed me to this thing. I thought of Jenkins waiting by his farm, of Reeves trying to protect his people the only way he knew how, of all the families that had already fled and those that remained. I took a step forward, then another. The being's appendage was inches from my face now. I could feel its power radiating outward, a cold fire that promised both oblivion and rebirth. "Will it hurt?" I asked, though I wasn't sure if I spoke aloud or just thought the question. The answer came as a flood of sensation, pain beyond imagining, followed by an expansion of consciousness that would compensate for any suffering. It would hurt, and then it would transform. I closed my eyes and reached out, my fingers connecting with the being's strange appendage. The world exploded into light and sound and pain. My body felt as if it were being unmade cell by cell, then reconstructed according to an alien blueprint. I was aware of screaming, though I couldn't tell if the sound came from me or from the thing I was becoming part of. Time stretched and collapsed, meaningless in the face of what was happening. When awareness returned, I was still in the hollow, but everything looked different. The world had gained dimensions I hadn't been able to perceive before, colors beyond the human spectrum, sounds at frequencies no human ear could detect. And I could feel the forest around me, every tree, every creature as extensions of myself. But I wasn't gone. Some core of my humanity remained, preserved like an insect in amber. I was both myself and something else now, something older, something hungry, something that had been lonely for a very, very long time. I would keep my promise. Pine Ridge would be safe again. The attacks would stop. The thing in Devil's Wood had what it wanted, a bridge to understanding the human world. And as for me, I'm still here in a way, watching, waiting, learning. Sometimes when the moon is full, you might catch a glimpse of me moving between the trees at the edge of town. Don't be afraid. I remember what it was to be human. I remember compassion, mercy, sacrifice. But I remember hunger too. And the forest must be respected. The boundaries must be maintained. That was the deal after all. That was the price of peace. So, if you find yourself near Pine Ridge County, heed the warnings. Stay away from Devil's Wood. Not every sacrifice ends like mine. Not everyone who enters those trees becomes something new. Most just become food, and the hunger? It never truly goes away. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy who'd end up in a story like this. Truck driving is straightforward, or at least it used to be. You get the call, you get the load, and you drive. You stop for a burger or coffee now and then, but most days you're just a guy on the road with nothing but miles ahead of you, and the occasional radio chatter to keep you company. Simple, but this time it was anything but. My name's Trevor DeWitt. Been driving trucks for nearly 15 years, no complaints. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work. I started right out of high school. Dad did it, his dad did it. Figured I'd follow in the family line. The cab of my Peterbilt was more home to me than my actual apartment in Cheyenne. I'd customized it over the years, photos taped to the dash, a small ceramic dog that my niece had given me for luck, and a worn seat cushion that had molded perfectly to my backside after thousands of miles. The engine's steady rumble was my lullaby, the endless ribbon of asphalt my companion. May 2023 had been a slow month. Fuel prices climbing again, fewer contracts coming in. I was behind on rent and starting to feel the squeeze when my dispatcher, Mac, called me around 10 p.m. on a Wednesday. "DeWitt," he barked into the phone, his voice gruffer than usual. "Got an emergency haul. Mining equipment to the Northern Star operation past Devil's Gorge. Their excavator broke down, and they need replacement parts yesterday." I sat up in my bed, rubbing sleep from my eyes. "Devil's Gorge? At night? You know that road's a nightmare in daylight?" "Double rate," Mac said, cutting through my objection. "Cash bonus on delivery if you can get there before 8 a.m. The mention of double pay made my empty wallet suddenly feel heavier. "Text me the details. I'll be at the depot in 30. I hung up and stared at the ceiling for a moment. Devil's Gorge had a reputation among drivers. The narrow, winding road cut through one of the most remote parts of Wyoming, with sheer cliffs on one side and a dizzying drop on the other. No guardrails in most spots. No cell service. Just you, your rig, and whatever lurked in the shadows. But money was money, and I needed it. I arrived at the depot just before midnight. The warehouse was mostly dark except for a single loading bay, where two workers were securing a tarp over what looked like machinery parts in the bed of my trailer. Mac stood nearby, clipboard in hand, looking more haggard than usual under the harsh yellow lights. "There he is," Mac said, handing me the clipboard. "Sign here and here." I scanned the manifest. "This is industrial drill parts and hydraulics. Thought you said it was excavator parts?" Mac shrugged. "Whatever it is, it's urgent. Northern Star's losing money every hour they're not digging." I signed the papers and did my pre-trip inspection. The load was secure, tires were good, lights all working. As I climbed into the cab, Mac called out, "Take it slow on the gorge, DeWitt. Road's been washing out with the spring rains." I nodded and fired up the engine. Always do. The first few hours of the drive were uneventful. The interstate was clear and traffic was minimal. Talk radio kept me company until I lost signal around 2 a.m. By then, I was turning onto Route 16, the last marked road before the unnamed service path that led to Devil's Gorge. The moon hung low and bloated in the sky, casting everything in a pale, sickly glow. As I drove farther from civilization, the landscape changed. Lush grasslands gave way to scrubby brush, then to bare, jagged rock formations that looked like broken teeth jutting from the earth. The temperature dropped suddenly as I approached the entrance to the gorge. My truck's thermometer showed a 15-degree drop in less than 10 minutes. I turned up the heater and gripped the wheel tighter. The road narrowed as I entered the gorge proper, forcing me to slow to a crawl. My headlights barely penetrated the thick darkness ahead, illuminating only the immediate stretch of potholed asphalt and the towering rock walls that seemed to press in from both sides. I'd driven this route maybe 4 or 5 times before, always during daylight. At night it was transformed. Shadows played tricks on my eyes, making me think I saw movement where there couldn't possibly be any. The cliffs above loomed like silent sentinels, watching my progress with indifferent malice. 3 hours into the gorge, with nothing but the sound of my tires on rough pavement and the occasional ping of rocks hitting my undercarriage, I began to feel the weight of the isolation. My eyelids grew heavy, despite the thermos of coffee I'd been nursing. I rolled down the window, letting the bitter, cold air slap me awake. That's when I first heard it. A faint, rhythmic sound, like footsteps keeping pace with my truck. I glanced at my side mirrors, but the darkness behind me revealed nothing. I increased my speed slightly, and the sound seemed to fade. Must be road debris caught in the wheel well, I thought, pushing away the unease that had settled in my gut. The road took a sharp turn, and I navigated it carefully, mindful of how close the edge was. As I rounded the bend, my headlights swept across something that made me stamp on the brakes, a figure standing motionless at the side of the road. My truck skidded slightly on the loose gravel before coming to a stop, the brakes hissing in protest. There, bathed in the harsh glow of my headlights, stood a man. He was tall and impossibly thin, with a gaunt face partially obscured by a patchy beard. His clothes, torn jeans, a filthy jacket, and mud-caked boots hung from his frame as if they belonged to someone twice his size. One arm was outstretched, thumb extended in the universal hitchhiker's gesture, but he held it with such rigid stillness that it seemed more like a threat than a request. I hesitated, hand hovering over the window control. Every trucker knows the risks of picking up strangers, especially in places like this. But we also know what it means to be stranded miles from help with night closing in. I rolled down my window just enough to call out, "Need help?" I shouted, keeping my hand near the seat where I kept my tire iron. The man didn't respond immediately. He just stared, unblinking, his eyes reflecting my headlights like an animal's. I was about to roll up my window and drive on when he finally moved, taking one deliberate step toward my truck. "You need a ride? Car trouble?" I tried again, fighting the instinct to just drive away. His movements were off-jerky and mechanical, like someone trying to remember how their limbs worked. As he got closer, I could see how pale he was, his skin almost translucent in the headlights. Against every alarm bell ringing in my head, I popped the passenger door open. "Hey," I said again, louder this time. "You all right? You need a ride?" He approached the truck with that same deliberate slowness. Up close, I could see dark circles beneath his eyes, so pronounced they looked like bruises. His lips were cracked and bloodless. "I need to get to Devil's Gorge," he finally said, his voice like dry leaves scraping across pavement. "Well, you're already there, pal," I replied, gesturing to the towering rock walls around us. "You looking for the mines?" "No," he said flatly, "just the gorge." A chill that had nothing to do with the night air crept down my spine. The way he said it, without inflection, without emotion, set off every warning instinct I'd developed in 15 years on the road. "Look, buddy, I don't think it's safe for you to be out here alone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hop in. I'll get you to the next town." He hesitated, eyes flickering between me and something behind him that I couldn't see. Finally, he climbed into the cab with a stiffness that suggested pain or injury. The moment he shut the door, the temperature in the truck seemed to plummet. I cranked the heater higher, but it did little to dispel the cold that had settled in like a living thing. I pulled back onto the road, stealing glances at my silent passenger. He sat perfectly still, hands folded in his lap, staring straight ahead. The sleeve of his jacket had ridden up slightly, revealing what looked like a dark, jagged scar or burn that snaked up his forearm and disappeared under the torn fabric. "Name's Trevor," I offered, more to break the silence than anything else. "Vincent," he replied after a beat, though something in the way he said it made me think he'd just invented the name on the spot. "So, Vincent, what brings you out to these parts? Not exactly tourist country." He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his words sent that chill crawling back up my spine. "It's close," he murmured. "What's close?" I asked, gripping the wheel tighter. "Devil's Gorge," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It's not just a place, it's a threshold." I forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow even to my own ears. "A threshold to what?" Vincent turned to look at me then, and I wished he hadn't. His eyes, there was something wrong with them. They were dark, almost black in the dim light of the cab, but it wasn't their color that disturbed me. It was what lurked behind them, something ancient and patient and hungry. "To the other side," he said simply. I kept my eyes firmly on the road, pretending to focus on a particularly treacherous curve ahead. The other side of what? Everything, he replied. They come back different. I didn't ask who they were. I didn't want to know. We drove in silence for the next 15 miles. The road grew worse, forcing me to slow to a crawl in some spots where erosion had eaten away half the lane. All the while, Vincent sat motionless beside me, that unnatural stillness broken only by the occasional blink or slight turn of his head toward the darkness outside. I was about to suggest we turn on the radio when Vincent suddenly tensed. His head snapped toward the passenger window, eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. "Stop the truck," he said, his voice suddenly urgent. I glanced at him, then back at the road. "What? Why?" "Stop, now." There was something in his tone, a command, not a request. I started to argue, but was cut short by a sound that made my blood run cold, a low, keening wail that seemed to come from the rock walls themselves. It rose in pitch, becoming a shrill cry that set my teeth on edge before abruptly cutting off. "What the hell was that?" I asked, slowing the truck. Vincent's eyes never left the window. "They're here," he whispered. Before I could respond, something slammed into the side of my trailer, a heavy, solid impact that rocked the entire rig. I cursed and hit the brakes, scanning my mirrors for what I'd hit, but the road behind us was empty, just darkness and swirling dust in my taillights. "What was that?" I demanded, turning to Vincent. But the passenger seat was empty. The door hung open, swinging slightly with the rocking of the truck. Vincent had vanished. I threw the truck into park and grabbed my tire iron from under the seat. "Vincent," I called out, my voice echoing off the canyon walls. Silence answered me. I climbed down from the cab, sweeping my flashlight across the road. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but cracked asphalt and the occasional scrubby plant clinging to life in the harsh terrain. "Vincent," I tried again, louder this time. A sound from behind the truck drew my attention, the scrape of boot on gravel. I swung my flashlight toward it, heart hammering against my ribs. There was Vincent, standing at the rear of the trailer, his back to me. He was perfectly still, head tilted slightly as if listening for something. "What the hell, man?" I approached him, anger momentarily overriding my fear. "You can't just jump out like that." "What hit my truck?" Vincent didn't turn around. "We need to leave," he said, his voice oddly flat. "Now." "Not until you tell me what's going on," I insisted, reaching for his shoulder. He moved then, with a speed that took me by surprise. His hand clamped around my wrist before I could touch him, grip like iron. "Listen," he hissed, bringing his face close to mine. "They're coming through. We need to go." I pulled away from him, raising the tire iron slightly. "Who's coming through? What are you talking about?" Vincent's eyes darted to something over my shoulder, widening almost imperceptibly. I started to turn, but his hand shot out, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "Don't," he whispered. "Don't look directly at it." But I did look. I couldn't help myself. At first, I saw nothing, just the dark outline of the canyon against the night sky. Then I noticed a patch of darkness that seemed deeper, more absolute than the rest. It moved with a jerky, unnatural rhythm, like footage of a spider played at the wrong speed. As it came closer, features began to resolve themselves in the beam of my flashlight. A figure, tall and emaciated, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its skin was pale and waxy, stretched tight over a frame that was almost skeletal. But it was the face that made my heart stutter in my chest, a face that was almost human, but wrong in subtle, nightmarish ways. The proportions were skewed, the features slightly misaligned. Its eyes were sunken into deep sockets, reflecting my flashlight with an unnatural silvery gleam. It moved toward us with that same jerky gait, like it was still learning how to use its limbs. "What the hell is that?" I whispered, taking an involuntary step back. "They don't belong here," Vincent replied, voice low and tense. "But they always come back, different." The creature, I couldn't think of it as human, paused about 20 feet away, its head tilted at an impossible angle, like it was trying to get a better look at us. Then its face split in a parody of a smile, revealing teeth that were too numerous, too sharp. "Run," Vincent said simply. Get in the truck and drive." I didn't need to be told twice. I backed toward the cab, keeping my eyes on the thing and my tire iron raised. Vincent stayed where he was, positioned between me and the creature, his stance oddly rigid. I had just reached the driver's side door when the creature moved, a blur of pale limbs lunging forward with impossible speed. Vincent met it halfway, his body colliding with it in a tangle of limbs that sent them both sprawling onto the asphalt. The sounds they made were inhuman, not grunts or shouts of pain, but high, keening wails that echoed off the canyon walls. I watched, frozen in horror, as they grappled on the ground, movements too fast, too fluid to follow. Vincent fought with a ferocity I wouldn't have expected from his gaunt frame, hands clawing at the creature's throat and face. Blood or something like it, black and viscous in the dim light, spattered the ground around them. The creature gained the upper hand, pinning Vincent to the ground. Its mouth opened wider than any human mouth should, unhinging like a snake's jaw as it lowered its face toward Vincent's neck. Without thinking, I charged forward and swung the tire iron with all my strength. It connected with the creature's head with a sickening wet crunch. The thing reeled back, a sound like radio static erupting from its throat. Vincent used the distraction to twist free, driving his elbow into the creature's chest, with enough force that I heard ribs crack. The thing stumbled backward, its movements suddenly uncoordinated. Vincent was on it in an instant, fingers digging into its throat, pressing it down onto the asphalt. I heard another crack, louder, more final, and the creature went limp. Silence descended on the gorge, broken only by Vincent's ragged breathing and the distant whistle of wind through the rocks. "Is it dead?" I managed to ask, the tire iron hanging limply at my side. Vincent stood up slowly, wiping his hands on his jeans. Black ichor stained his skin up to the elbows. "For now," he said. I stared at the thing on the ground. In death, it looked even less human. Its limbs bent at odd angles, its skin already turning a mottled gray. "What was that thing?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Vincent didn't answer. Instead, he bent down and grabbed the creature's ankles, dragging it toward the edge of the road where the canyon fell away into darkness. "Help me," he grunted. I hesitated, then moved to grab the thing's wrists. Its skin was cold and had a waxy texture that made my stomach turn. Together, we hefted it over the guardrail, watching as it tumbled down into the abyss below. "We need to go," Vincent said, already heading back to the truck. "There will be more." "More?" I echoed, feeling lightheaded. "What do you mean, more? What were those things? What the hell is going on?" Vincent paused, turning to face me. In the harsh glow of my truck's headlights, he looked almost as inhuman as the creature we'd just killed, gaunt and pale, with eyes that held too much knowledge. "They come from the gorge," he said simply. "It's a place where the barrier is thin. Things slip through. Some of them wear human faces, but they're not human. Not anymore." I felt cold sweat trickling down my back despite the chill in the air. "And you? What are you?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face, the first real expression I'd seen from him. "Just a man who knows too much," he said. "Now drive." We got back on the road, the truck's engine growling as I pushed it faster than was safe on the winding canyon path. Vincent sat beside me, silent and watchful, his eyes constantly scanning the darkness beyond the headlights. "Slow down at the next bend," he said suddenly, breaking the silence that had stretched between us for miles. I glanced at him, then back at the road. "Why?" "Because they'll be waiting." The certainty in his voice sent a fresh wave of dread washing over me, but I eased off the accelerator as we approached the curve. The headlights swept across the road as we rounded the bend, revealing nothing, just empty asphalt stretching ahead. I shot Vincent an accusatory look, but he remained tense, eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. "There," he said, pointing to a spot just off the road where the canyon wall jutted out. I squinted, seeing nothing at first. Then a shadow moved against the rock face, a darker patch that separated itself from the background, then another, and another. "Jesus," I breathed, counting at least 5 of the things lurking just beyond the reach of my headlights. "Don't stop," Vincent instructed. "Keep a steady pace. Not too fast, not too slow." I did as he said. keeping the truck at a constant speed as we passed the spot where the creatures waited. They made no move to approach the road, but I could feel their eyes following us, hungry, patient eyes that had never known human thought. "What are they waiting for?" I asked when we were safely past. "A weakness," Vincent replied. "A moment of doubt. Fear makes the barrier thin." "What barrier? You keep talking in riddles, man." Vincent was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, as if reciting something memorized long ago. "There are places in the world where reality wears thin," he said. "Cracks in the foundation. Devil's Gorge is one such place. It's been that way since long before Europeans came to this continent. The native tribes avoided it. Settlers disappeared here. The mining company loses workers every year, though they blame it on accidents, equipment failures, exposure. You're saying these things. They come through from somewhere else?" Vincent nodded. "And sometimes people go through from our side. Most don't come back. Those that do." He trailed off, absently rubbing the dark, jagged scar on his forearm. A horrible realization dawned on me. "You've been to the other side." It wasn't a question, but Vincent answered anyway, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "Yes." "How? When?" "I was working for Northern Star, Geological Survey Team 2 years ago. We were mapping a new section of the gorge for potential expansion of the mine. There was a cave. We thought it was just another fissure in the rock, but it went deep. Too deep." I gripped the wheel tighter, not wanting to hear the rest but unable to stop him. "We followed it, me and 3 others. Standard procedure, nothing unusual at first. Then the passage twisted in ways that weren't right, angles that couldn't exist, distances that stretched and compressed. Davis was the first to notice something was wrong, but by then it was too late. We'd crossed over." "Crossed over to what?" I asked, dreading the answer. Vincent's eyes met mine, and in them I saw a profound emptiness that chilled me to the core. A place that isn't a place, a realm of absence, of hunger. They found us immediately, took the others. I ran, found my way back through sheer luck, or maybe they let me go, to follow, to show them the way. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing the full extent of the scar I'd glimpsed earlier. It wasn't a scar at all, but a pattern intricate geometric lines etched into his flesh in a way that made my eyes hurt to look at them directly. "They marked me," he said simply, "so they can find me again, so I can find them." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my mouth dry. "Because you need to understand what we're dealing with. These aren't animals or monsters from a movie. They're something else entirely. Entities that exist in the spaces between realities. They want what we have. Life, substance, meaning. And they're coming through at Devil's Gorge." Vincent nodded. "More and more lately. The mining, the blasting, it's weakening the barrier, making it easier for them to slip through." We drove in silence for several minutes, the weight of his words settling over me like a shroud. Part of me wanted to dismiss it all as the ravings of a madman, but I'd seen those things with my own eyes, fought them, killed one. "If what you're saying is true," I finally said, "why hasn't anyone done anything about it? Shut down the mine, warned people?" A bitter laugh escaped Vincent's lips. Who would believe it? And even if they did, there's too much money in those mines. Northern Star owns half the politicians in the state. Besides, most of the disappearances are written off as accidents. Mining is dangerous work. So what do? "We survive," Vincent said simply. "Get through the gorge. Get your delivery to the mine, and then get as far away from this place as you can." The road widened slightly as we approached a section where the canyon walls pulled back, creating a small valley. Moonlight spilled into the space, illuminating a landscape that seemed almost peaceful after the oppressive darkness of the narrow pass. "We're almost through," Vincent said, tension visibly draining from his shoulders. "Another 5 miles to the northern exit, then 10 more to the mine." I allowed myself to relax slightly, rolling my shoulders to ease the knots that had formed there. "And after the delivery, what then?" "You go home. Forget this ever happened." "And you?" Vincent's gaze drifted to the window, to the moonlit canyon beyond. "I stay. I watch. I wait. For what? For them to make their next move, or for someone who knows how to close the breach? I wanted to ask more, but a sudden movement in my peripheral vision caught my attention. Something darted across the road ahead, a pale, elongated shape that moved with that same unnatural, jerky gait. I slammed on the brakes instinctively, the truck skidding on the loose gravel. Vincent braced himself against the dashboard, cursing under his breath. "Don't stop," he hissed, but it was too late. The truck shuddered to a halt, and in the sudden silence that followed, I heard them, the soft scrape of too many feet on asphalt, approaching from all sides. They surrounded us within seconds, pale, twisted figures emerging from the shadows like nightmares given flesh. I counted 8 of them, circling the truck with that strange, deliberate movement that was both mechanical and fluid. "Drive," Vincent urged, his voice tight with barely contained panic. "Run them down if you have to." I threw the truck into gear, but as I did, one of the creatures leapt onto the hood with impossible agility, its face pressed against the windshield, a grotesque parody of human features, mouth stretching into a grin that revealed rows of needle-like teeth. "Go!" Vincent shouted, but I was frozen, staring into the thing's eyes, milky white orbs that somehow still managed to convey a terrible hunger. The windshield began to crack under its hands, long spindly fingers ending in what looked more like talons than nails. Small fissures spread out in a web from where it pressed against the glass. Vincent lunged across me, slamming his fist against the horn. The sudden blare seemed to startle the creature, causing it to rear back. In that moment of distraction, I floored the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning on the loose gravel before finding purchase. The creature on the hood lost its grip, tumbling off to the side. I felt a sickening thud as the wheels rolled over something, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. More thuds followed as I plowed through the ring of entities, Vincent gripping the dashboard with white knuckles. "Don't slow down," he said through gritted teeth. "No matter what." I kept the pedal to the floor, pushing the rig well beyond what was safe on the winding canyon road. The engine roared in protest, the trailer swaying dangerously behind us as we took curves at speeds that threatened to tip us over. In my rearview mirror, I could see them giving chase. Pale figures running with that same unnatural gait, moving far faster than anything human had a right to move. But the truck was faster, and gradually they fell behind, becoming smaller and smaller until they were lost in the darkness. "We're clear," Vincent said after several miles of tense silence, his voice ragged with exhaustion. "For now." I eased off the accelerator slightly, letting the engine's protest fade to a more manageable growl. My hands were cramping from their death grip on the wheel, and I could feel sweat soaking through my shirt despite the cold. "What happens when we reach the mine?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You make your delivery," Vincent replied. "Act normal. Don't mention any of this." "And then what? I just drive away? Pretend none of this happened?" Vincent turned to look at me, his expression unreadable in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. "Yes," he said simply. "That's exactly what you do. And people keep disappearing. Those things keep coming through." "It's not your fight." I laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "The hell it isn't. I've seen them. I've killed one. I'm involved now whether I want to be or not." Vincent shook his head. "You don't understand what you're saying. These entities, they can sense when someone knows about them. They're drawn to it. The more you think about them, the more attention you draw." "So I'm supposed to, what, develop selective amnesia?" "If you want to live, yes." We fell into silence after that, the only sound the rumble of the engine and the occasional ping of gravel against the undercarriage. The road began to climb, winding its way up and out of the gorge. As we crested the ridge, I could see the sprawling complex of the Northern Star Mine in the distance, lights blazing against the pre-dawn darkness. "Almost there," I murmured, more to myself than to Vincent. As we approached the mine's security checkpoint, Vincent tensed beside me. "Drop me here," he said abruptly. I glanced at him in surprise. "What? We're not even at the gate yet. I can't go in there. Some of them know me, remember me, questions I can't answer." I slowed the truck, pulling over to the side of the road about half a mile from the checkpoint. What am I supposed to tell them when they ask why I'm dropping off mining equipment in the middle of the night? The truth. "You got a call from dispatch, emergency delivery, double pay." And if they ask about you? Vincent's expression hardened. There was no passenger. You made the drive alone, just like every other time. I wanted to argue, but the intensity in his eyes stopped me. I put the truck in park and turned to face him fully. What happens now? To you? I go back, he said simply. Back to the gorge. Someone has to watch. Someone has to know. That's not much of a life. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. No, but it's the one I have. He reached for the door handle, then paused. When you leave here, take the eastern route, he said. It's longer, but it avoids the gorge. And whatever you do, don't drive this road at night again. I nodded, unable to find words adequate for the moment. Vincent climbed out of the cab, his gaunt figure silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky. He turned back once, raising a hand in farewell, then vanished into the shadows beside the road with unsettling swiftness. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, trying to process everything that had happened. Part of me wondered if I'd imagined it all, the creatures, Vincent, the fight at the back of my truck. But the memory was too vivid, the fear too real. Finally, I put the truck in gear and continued to the checkpoint. As Vincent had predicted, the security guard barely glanced at me. Just another trucker making a delivery. Nothing unusual except perhaps the hour. The unloading was quick and efficient. The mining foreman signed off on the delivery without comment, though his eyes lingered on the dents and scratches on the side of my trailer, damage I hadn't noticed before, but which clearly showed where something had slammed into the metal with considerable force. By the time I was ready to leave, the sun was rising, painting the eastern sky in shades of orange and pink. The gorge that had seemed so menacing in the darkness now looked almost beautiful, the morning light turning the red sandstone to gold. I took Vincent's advice and chose the eastern route for my return journey, a longer drive by about 3 hours, but one that curved well away from Devil's Gorge. As I pulled onto the highway, I glanced in my rearview mirror for one last look at the place. A figure stood at the side of the road, watching my departure. Even at this distance, I recognized Vincent's gaunt silhouette. He raised a hand in farewell, then turned and began walking, not toward the safety of the mine or the small town beyond it, but back toward the gorge, back toward the threshold, back toward the things that waited in the darkness. I never drove through Devil's Gorge again, turned down every job that would have taken me near it, no matter how good the pay. When other drivers asked why, I made up excuses. Bad roads, worse memories, a promise to my mother that I'd stay on the main highways. Sometimes, late at night when I'm on a lonely stretch of highway, I think I see pale figures at the edge of my headlight's reach, watching, waiting, hungry. I tell myself it's fatigue playing tricks on my eyes. Has to be, but I keep my speed steady, never too fast, never too slow. I avoid the shadowed places where the world might wear thin, and I never, ever pick up hitchhikers, because I know what waits beyond the threshold, and I know that sometimes they find their way through. Lightning flickered against the treetops as I drove down the winding road towards Mark Twain National Forest. The forecast had warned of storms, but I didn't expect the sky to darken so quickly. My name is Adrian Reynolds, and in 2014 I was 35 years old and had been working as a search and rescue officer for nearly a decade. I had a reputation for finding people who didn't want to be found and for venturing into places others wouldn't. The radio crackled with static as I adjusted the dial. Adrian, you reading me? The voice belonged to Rebecca Chen, my supervisor and the person who'd called me in on my day off. I'm here, about 15 minutes from the coordinates, I replied, squinting through the windshield as raindrops began to splatter across it. Good. Listen, this is the third abandoned campsite we've found this month. No signs of the campers, just their belongings left behind. Local sheriff thinks it might be bears, but she hesitated. Something doesn't add up. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. What aren't you telling me, Becca? The rangers found blood at the second site, not much, but enough to concern us. And the way the tents were torn, it didn't look like animal damage. Too deliberate. The forest loomed ahead, ancient oaks and pines creating a wall of darkness even in daylight. I'd spent countless hours in these woods, but something about Becca's tone made the familiar landscape seem suddenly foreign. Any witnesses? Reports of strange activity? Nothing concrete. Some hikers mentioned hearing odd noises at night. One guy swore he saw something tall moving between the trees, but he was also 3 beers in when the ranger interviewed him. I pulled onto a narrow dirt road, my truck jostling over exposed roots and rocks. I'll check it out and radio back. If I find anything suspicious, I'll mark it and we can bring in a team tomorrow. Be careful, Adrian. Take photos of everything, and don't stay after dark if you can help it. Since when are you superstitious? I asked, attempting to lighten the mood. Since 3 groups of campers vanished without a trace. The line went dead, leaving me with only the rumble of thunder for company. The first raindrops fell as I parked at the trailhead. I grabbed my gear, flashlight, first aid kit, radio, GPS, knife, and camera, and locked the truck. According to my map, the abandoned campsite was about a mile in near Beaver Creek. I'd hiked this trail dozens of times but never noticed anything unusual beyond the occasional signs of wildlife. The path narrowed as I walked deeper into the forest. Oak and hickory trees stretched overhead, their canopies blocking what little light remained in the stormy sky. The air felt heavy with moisture and something else, a tension I couldn't quite define. My boots left clear impressions in the soft earth as the rain picked up, soaking through my jacket. 20 minutes later, I reached the campsite. It was exactly as Becca described, abandoned, but not in a way that suggested the campers had simply packed up and left. A small fire ring contained the ash of a long-dead fire. Nearby, a water jug lay on its side, half buried in mud. Tangled rope and empty food cans were scattered around, along with a torn backpack caught on a low branch. I pulled out my camera and began documenting everything, moving methodically through the site. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves overhead and carrying the scent of impending rain. As I circled the perimeter, I noticed something odd. Footprints, lots of them, going in every direction. Some were clearly hiking boots, others looked like sneakers, but they all showed signs of people moving quickly, erratically. Like they were running, I murmured to myself, kneeling to examine the clearest set of prints. They belonged to someone with small feet, a woman or teenager perhaps, and showed a full sprint heading east, away from the established trails. I tried my radio, hoping to update Becca on what I'd found, but received only static in return. The storm was interfering with the signal, which meant I was effectively cut off until I returned to higher ground or the weather improved. With daylight fading and the rain picking up, I should have headed back. That would have been the protocol: mark the site, return with a team. But something about those frantically spaced footprints pulled at me. Someone had been terrified, running for their life. And if there was any chance they were still out there, injured or lost, I pulled my raincoat tighter and clicked on my flashlight. Following the footprints, I moved deeper into the woods, away from the safety of the trail. The undergrowth became thicker, thorny vines catching on my pants as I pushed forward. The rain fell harder now, but the tracks were still visible, pressed deep into the soft forest floor. Then I spotted something else, another set of impressions interspersed with the human footprints. These were different, wider, with unusual depressions around the edges, almost like something with a strange, uneven gait was following the runner. Not a bear, definitely not a deer. The spacing was all wrong, too close together for something large. Yet the impressions were deep, suggesting considerable weight. A crack of thunder shook the forest, and I jumped despite myself. I'd been so focused on the tracks that I hadn't noticed how dark it had become, or how far I'd strayed from the trail. The forest looked different here. Older, more primeval. The trees grew closer together, their branches twisting overhead like gnarled fingers. I checked my GPS and marked my location. According to the display, I was nearly half a mile from the campsite now, heading southeast toward a small clearing that wasn't marked on my map. Rain plastered my hair to my forehead as I debated turning back. Another flash of lightning illuminated the forest, and in that brief moment of clarity, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A strip of fabric fluttering from a broken branch ahead, dark with what looked like dried blood. The fabric turned out to be a torn piece of raincoat, similar to the one I was wearing but in bright red. I carefully removed it from the branch, noting how it had been ripped rather than cut. The edges were jagged and frayed. More concerning were the dark stains that covered nearly half of it. I took several photos before slipping it into an evidence bag. The storm showed no signs of abating as I continued following the tracks. They led me to a small stream, swollen with rainwater and rushing over smooth stones. Under normal circumstances, this would be a peaceful spot, but tonight, with the thunder rolling overhead and rain pelting my face, it felt ominous. The footprints disappeared at the water's edge. Whoever had been running had either crossed the stream or used it to cover their trail. I scanned the far bank with my flashlight but saw no signs of exit prints. Making a quick decision, I waded across, the cold water soaking through my boots and chilling my feet. On the other side, I searched for several minutes before locating a partial boot print pressed into a patch of mud. Relief washed over me. I hadn't lost the trail completely. But as I followed this new set of prints, I noticed something troubling. They were different from the ones I'd been tracking earlier. These were larger, the stride longer, suggesting a different person altogether. The rain eased slightly as I entered a dense thicket of pine trees. The ground here was carpeted with needles, making tracks harder to identify, but occasional depressions in the soft earth confirmed I was still on someone's trail. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing glimpses of the forest. A twisted root, a fallen log, a cluster of mushrooms gleaming with moisture. I'd been walking for nearly an hour when I stumbled across the first truly disturbing find. In a small clearing between two massive oak trees lay the carcass of a deer. But this wasn't a normal kill. The animal's body had been torn open, its ribcage splayed outward as if something had burst from within. The organs were missing, and deep gashes ran along its flanks, wounds that didn't match any predator I'd encountered in these woods. My training kicked in as I fought back the urge to retreat. I photographed the carcass from multiple angles, trying to capture the unusual nature of the wounds. The smell of decay mixed with the petrichor of rain-soaked earth made me gag, but I forced myself to examine the scene carefully. Around the deer were those strange tracks again, the ones with the irregular edges. Here they were clearer, pressed into blood-soaked soil. They resembled humanoid footprints but were too elongated, the toes spread wide and ending in what looked like sharp points. Whatever made them walked on two legs, but wasn't human. I tried the radio again, desperate to report my findings, but received only electronic hissing in return. Looking at my GPS, I realized I was now over a mile from my truck, in a section of the forest rarely visited by hikers. The smart move would be to head back immediately, but the thought of someone possibly injured or trapped kept me moving forward. Beyond the clearing, the forest grew even denser. Old-growth trees blocked much of the rain, creating an eerie stillness beneath their canopy. My flashlight beam seemed weaker here, barely penetrating the gloom ahead. Every few yards I found more evidence of passage, broken branches, disturbed ground, occasional scraps of fabric or trash. Then I found a shoe, a single hiking boot, size 10, caked in mud and what looked disturbingly like dried blood. It lay upturned in a patch of ferns, its laces still tied, as if it had been violently pulled from its wearer's foot. I added it to my growing collection of evidence, my pack becoming heavier with each disturbing find. The light drizzle continued as I pressed on, my clothes soaked through and my spirits dampening with each step. What had started as a routine check of an abandoned campsite had morphed into something far more sinister. People had fled through these woods in terror, leaving behind possessions, blood, and a trail of panic. Just when I considered turning back, my flashlight beam caught something unexpected, the tattered corner of a tent through the trees ahead. Hope surged through me. Perhaps I'd found another campsite where the missing people had sought refuge. I approached cautiously, scanning the surroundings for movement. The tent was part of a larger camp, 3 shelters arranged around what had once been a fire pit. Like the first site, this one showed signs of hasty abandonment, but with one key difference. Everything was coated in a fine layer of dust and pine needles, suggesting it had been empty for weeks, not days. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small against the vastness of the forest. Anyone here? Search and rescue. Only the patter of rain answered me. I moved through the camp, examining each tent. The first contained a sleeping bag and backpack, both mildewed from exposure to the elements. The second was empty save for a lantern with a cracked lens. The third had collapsed, its poles bent at unnatural angles as if something heavy had fallen across it. Inside the backpack, I found a wallet containing an ID for Michael Reeves, age 28, from Springfield, Missouri. There was also a journal, its pages warped from humidity but still readable. I flipped it open, angling my flashlight to see the entries. The first few pages contained typical camping notes, hike distances, wildlife sightings, weather observations. But the tone changed dramatically in the final entry, dated 6 weeks earlier. Day 5. Something is watching us from the trees. Liz thinks I'm imagining things, but I've seen movement at night just beyond our firelight. Not an animal, too tall, too deliberate. James found weird tracks this morning, like nothing he's ever seen. We're packing up tomorrow, cutting the trip short. Can't shake the feeling we're being hunted. A cold weight settled in my stomach as I read the words. 6 weeks ago, long before the recent disappearances. Whatever was happening in these woods had been going on for some time. I photographed the journal pages and was about to continue searching when a sudden crash echoed through the trees. Something large moving quickly through the underbrush headed in my direction. I doused my flashlight instinctively, plunging myself into darkness. Rain tapped gently on the fallen leaves as I crouched behind a large oak, straining to hear over the pounding of my heart. Another crash, closer now, followed by a sound that raised the hair on my arms. A wet, guttural breathing that didn't belong to any forest creature I recognized. Lightning flashed, illuminating the forest in stark white for a split second. In that frozen moment, I caught a glimpse of something moving between distant trees, a tall, elongated shape that seemed to flow rather than walk, its proportions all wrong for either man or beast. Then darkness swallowed it again, leaving me questioning what I'd seen. My breath came in shallow gasps as I pressed myself against the rough bark. Years of wilderness training told me to stay still, to avoid drawing attention. But every instinct screamed to run, to put as much distance between myself and whatever lurked in the shadows. The breathing sound stopped suddenly. The forest fell into an unnatural silence, broken only by the gentle patter of rain. Somehow, this was worse than the noise. At least before, I knew where the threat was. Now it could be anywhere. Minutes passed like hours as I remained motionless, barely daring to breathe. Gradually, the normal sounds of the forest returned, the rustle of wind through leaves, the distant call of a night bird. Whatever had been there seemed to have moved on. I waited another 10 minutes before finally risking my flashlight again, keeping the beam pointed downward to minimize its visibility. With trembling hands, I gathered the journal and ID, securing them in my pack. The urge to flee was overwhelming, but I forced myself to methodically photograph the rest of the camp before backing away slowly. As I turned to leave, my light caught something I'd missed, a series of deep gouges in the trunk of a nearby pine tree. 4 parallel lines, each about an inch deep, cut through the bark at roughly 7 feet above the ground. They weren't weathered or aged. These marks were recent, the exposed wood still seeping sap. I swallowed hard, raising my flashlight to examine the surrounding trees. Each bore similar markings, always at the same height, creating a perimeter around the abandoned camp, like territory markers or warnings. The rain picked up again as I started back the way I'd come, moving as quietly as possible while maintaining a brisk pace. The forest felt different now, no longer a familiar workplace but a labyrinth of shadows where something unnatural watched and waited. I checked my GPS frequently, making sure I was heading toward my truck. The device showed I was about a mile away when the batteries died, the screen flickering once before going dark. I cursed quietly, switching to my compass instead. East-northeast would eventually bring me to the main trail. The distinctive crack of a branch breaking somewhere behind me quickened my steps. I no longer cared about following the original tracks or collecting evidence. My only goal was to reach the safety of my vehicle before whatever was stalking these woods decided I was worth pursuing. The forest darkened as night fully descended, intensified by the storm clouds that blocked any moonlight. My flashlight carved a narrow tunnel through the blackness, barely illuminating 3 feet ahead of me. Rain fell steadily now, drumming against the canopy, and occasionally breaking through to soak my already drenched clothes. I maintained a steady pace, resisting the urge to run blindly through the treacherous terrain. A twisted ankle or broken leg would be a death sentence out here, especially with that thing somewhere in the darkness. My mind kept returning to those strange footprints, the mutilated deer, the claw marks too high for any natural predator. Another flash of lightning transformed the forest into a strobing nightmare of twisted branches and looming shadows. In that brief illumination, I spotted a familiar landmark, a lightning-struck oak that marked one of the side trails leading back to the main path. Relief washed over me. I wasn't lost after all. The trail was barely visible, overgrown with summer vegetation, but still easier to navigate than the dense forest. I moved faster now, my boots splashing through puddles as the ground grew increasingly waterlogged. Thunder rolled overhead, vibrating through my chest like a physical presence. 20 minutes of hard hiking brought me to a small wooden footbridge spanning a narrow ravine. Below, a swollen creek churned with muddy rainwater. I'd crossed this bridge dozens of times before, but tonight, halfway across, I froze in place. On the far side, illuminated by a flash of lightning, stood a figure. At first glance, it appeared to be a person, tall, thin, standing perfectly still at the trail's edge. But as lightning flashed again, I noticed details that sent ice through my veins. The proportions were wrong. Its arms hung too low, nearly to its knees, and its torso seemed unnaturally elongated. The head sat forward on a curved spine, giving it a perpetual, hunched appearance. I killed my flashlight immediately, plunging myself into darkness. Rain pelted my face as I stood motionless, hoping the figure hadn't seen me. Another lightning flash revealed the bridge was empty now. The figure had vanished. My breath came in ragged gasps as I stared into the darkness where it had stood. Had I imagined it? A trick of light and shadow, perhaps? Or a rain-soaked tree trunk transformed by my anxious mind? I waited several minutes before cautiously proceeding, flashlight still off, using the intermittent lightning to guide my way. The far side of the bridge revealed nothing. No tracks, no signs of the figure. I swept my gaze across the surrounding forest, seeing only trees swaying in the wind. Clicking my flashlight back on, I moved quickly down the trail, constantly looking over my shoulder. The path narrowed as it wound through a dense stand of pines, the needles underfoot muffling my footsteps. The relative quiet made every snapping twig and rustling branch stand out in stark relief. I had just rounded a bend when my light caught something that stopped me cold. A splash of color against the forest floor. A backpack torn open, its contents spilled across the trail. Clothing, a water bottle, energy bars, and a smashed cell phone lay scattered in the mud. Kneeling beside the pack, I noticed dark stains soaking the fabric. Blood, relatively fresh. Nearby lay a camera, its lens cracked but the body intact. I picked it up, checking if it still functioned. The power button lit the display, revealing the last images taken before it was dropped. The first few photos showed typical camping scenes, smiling people, forest views, a sunset over distant hills. The subjects were a young couple, mid-20s, with matching hiking gear and enthusiastic expressions. The final image, however, made my chest tighten. Taken at night, it showed only blurred darkness, except for what looked like a tall, emaciated figure at the frame's edge, caught in motion as it approached the photographer. I slipped the camera into my pack, standing quickly as a sense of being watched crawled up my spine. The rain had slackened to a light drizzle, but the air felt heavier somehow, charged with an electric tension that had nothing to do with the storm. "Hello?" I called out against my better judgment. "Is anyone there? Search and rescue?" My voice echoed through the trees, met only by the soft patter of raindrops. I turned slowly, scanning the surrounding forest with my flashlight. The beam caught something reflective about 30 yards off the trail, a pair of eyes watching me from between two massive tree trunks. Not human eyes. They were set too far apart, and instead of reflecting my light with the typical red or yellow eyeshine of forest animals, they gleamed with a dull, oily iridescence, like the surface of a polluted pond. I backed away slowly, keeping my light trained on those unblinking eyes. They remained fixed in place, neither advancing nor retreating. Then, without warning, they were gone, not closing or moving away, but simply vanishing as if they'd never been there at all. My retreat became less measured, turning into a barely controlled jog as I navigated the slippery trail. The weight of my pack bounced against my back, filled with evidence of something I couldn't explain, wouldn't want to explain to anyone who hadn't seen it for themselves. The trail widened as it joined the main path, bringing me within half a mile of my truck. I allowed myself a moment of hope. Whatever was out there hadn't pursued me openly. Perhaps I could make it back without further incident. That hope shattered with the sound of movement in the underbrush to my right. Quick, purposeful motion parallel to my path. Something was pacing me, matching my speed while staying just out of sight. I increased my pace, and the rustling kept time, never falling behind. Lightning flashed again, briefly illuminating the forest. In that split second, I caught a glimpse of my pursuer, a tall, lanky form moving with unnatural fluidity between the trees. Its skin appeared mottled and rough, like tree bark or weathered leather, and its limbs bent at odd angles with each step. Fear shot through me like electricity. I abandoned all pretense of caution and broke into a full sprint, careening down the muddy trail with reckless abandon. Branches whipped my face, and twice I nearly fell, my boots sliding on slick leaves and exposed roots. The thing kept pace, crashing through the forest beside me, no longer attempting stealth. I heard its labored breathing, a wet, rattling sound that reminded me of the death gasps I'd witnessed in my worst search and rescue experiences. The trail curved sharply, and I skidded around the bend, nearly colliding with a fallen tree blocking the path. I vaulted over it, landing awkwardly and feeling a sharp pain shoot through my ankle. Not broken, but definitely strained. I pushed through the pain, limping forward as quickly as possible. Behind me, I heard the creature leap the obstacle with ease, landing with a heavy thud that shook the ground. It was gaining on me now, my injured ankle slowing me just enough to give it an advantage. Through the trees ahead, I spotted the glint of metal, my truck, parked where I'd left it at the trailhead. Salvation was less than 100 yards away. I forced my burning legs to move faster, ignoring the stabbing pain with each step. 70 yards. 60. The sounds of pursuit grew louder, punctuated by that horrible wet breathing. A gnarled root caught my toe, sending me sprawling face first into the mud. My flashlight flew from my hand, its beam spinning crazily before landing pointed into the trees. My pack cushioned some of the fall, but pain still radiated from my palms and knees, where they'd impacted the ground. I scrambled to my feet, not daring to look back, leaving the flashlight where it had fallen. The truck was close enough now that I could see it clearly in the sporadic lightning flashes, a rectangular sanctuary in the wilderness. 30 yards, 20. The creature's breathing was right behind me now, close enough that I imagined I could feel its hot exhalations on my neck. I reached the edge of the clearing and sprinted for my vehicle, keys already in hand. With trembling fingers, I jammed the key into the lock and wrenched the door open, throwing myself inside. The door slammed shut behind me, just as something heavy collided with the side of the truck, rocking it on its suspension. My hands shook violently as I fumbled with the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I immediately locked all doors, frantically checking each window for signs of my pursuer. A flash of lightning revealed nothing but empty forest and rain-slicked ground. I threw the truck into reverse, backing away from the trailhead before shifting into drive and accelerating down the forest road. In my rearview mirror, a final lightning bolt illuminated a tall, hunched silhouette standing at the forest's edge, watching as I fled. I drove recklessly fast down the winding forest road, tires skidding on the wet pavement as I took corners too sharply. Adrenaline pumped through my system, keeping the pain in my ankle at bay and my senses hyper-alert. Every shadow seemed to move. Every tree branch scraping against the truck made me flinch. When I reached the main highway, I pulled over long enough to try my radio again. This time, I got through. Becca, do you copy? This is Adrian. Static crackled. Then her voice came through, concerned and slightly distorted. Adrian, where have you been? I've been trying to reach you for hours. Something's out there, Becca. Something. I paused, suddenly aware of how insane I would sound if I told her everything I'd seen. I found evidence of violence. Blood, torn clothing, abandoned equipment, and tracks I can't identify. Are you hurt? Her voice sharpened with worry. Just a twisted ankle. But I'm bringing back evidence. A journal, photos, a camera that might have captured. I trailed off again. Captured what, Adrian? I swallowed hard. I need to show you. I'm heading to the station now. I'll meet you there. Drive carefully. The storm's getting worse. She was right. The rain had intensified. Sheets of water slamming against my windshield faster than the wipers could clear them. Visibility was down to mere feet, forcing me to crawl along at 20 miles per hour. The 15-minute drive to the ranger station stretched to nearly 40 as I navigated the treacherous conditions. Lightning continued to flash overhead, briefly illuminating the road ahead before plunging it back into darkness. During one such flash, I spotted something that made my stomach lurch. A figure standing motionless on the shoulder, its elongated form unmistakable, even in that brief glimpse. I blinked, and it was gone. A hallucination, surely, born of fear and exhaustion. It couldn't have followed me this far, this fast. Not unless it knew these woods far better than any human could. The lights of the ranger station appeared through the downpour, a welcome sight after the horrors of the forest. I parked haphazardly near the entrance and limped inside, my soaked clothes leaving puddles on the linoleum floor. Becca met me in the lobby, her face tight with concern. At 45, she'd been running search and rescue operations in Mark Twain for over 20 years, and had seen just about everything the forest could throw at a person. Or so we thought. You look like hell, she said bluntly, helping me to a chair in her office. What happened out there? I dropped my mud-covered pack on her desk and began pulling out the evidence I'd collected. The blood-stained fabric, the hiking boot, the journal, the damaged camera. As I laid each item before her, I recounted my experience, starting with the abandoned campsite and ending with my frantic flight to the truck. I held back nothing, not even the most unbelievable details. The creature's impossible proportions, its inhuman speed, the way it seemed to vanish and reappear at will. Throughout my account, Becca's expression remained neutral, her years of training keeping any skepticism from showing on her face. When I finished, she picked up the camera, examining the final image with narrowed eyes. And you're certain this wasn't a bear? Maybe standing on its hind legs? Bears don't leave tracks like the ones I saw. They don't mark trees 7 feet off the ground, and they don't pursue prey the way this thing chased me. She nodded slowly, setting the camera down. I've known you 8 years, Adrian. You're not the type to exaggerate or imagine things. She rubbed her temples, considering. We need to bring in the sheriff, show him this evidence. And I want to get a team together to go back there tomorrow in daylight. You believe me then? I believe you saw something. What exactly, I'm not sure yet. She hesitated. There have been stories about that section of the forest. Old stories from before my time, hikers going missing, strange sounds at night. Most rangers dismiss it as campfire tales, but what? My predecessor used to say some parts of these woods were better left alone, that there were things out there older than the trees themselves. She shook her head. I never put much stock in it until the disappearances started up again. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with my wet clothes. Again? This has happened before? In the 70s, and before that, in the 30s. Clusters of disappearances over a few months, then nothing for decades. Always in the same general area. The implication settled over me like a physical weight. Whatever was stalking the forest wasn't new. It had been there for generations, perhaps centuries, preying on those who ventured too deep into its territory. Becca stood abruptly. You need dry clothes and medical attention for that ankle. Then I want you to write up everything you saw, every detail, no matter how small or strange it seems. I nodded, grateful for her pragmatic approach. As she helped me to the first aid room, a flash of movement outside the window caught my eye. I turned quickly, but saw only rain-soaked darkness and the vague outline of trees swaying in the wind. Yet the sense of being watched remained, a persistent itch between my shoulder blades that wouldn't subside. While a paramedic wrapped my ankle, Becca made calls, assembling a team for the morning expedition. I heard fragments of her conversations, careful descriptions of evidence found, requests for additional personnel, specific equipment needed for the search. Not once did she mention my description of the creature. That part, I realized, she was keeping between us until we had more concrete proof. By midnight, I had changed into dry clothes and completed my report, documenting every moment of my experience in clinical detail. Reading it back, the encounter seemed simultaneously more real and more impossible than it had in the moment. The rational part of my mind still sought explanations. A bear with mange, an unusually tall human with twisted intentions, a combination of bad weather and worse luck creating phantoms where none existed. But deeper down, I knew what I had seen was something else entirely. Something that didn't belong in our understanding of the natural world. Becca arranged for me to sleep in one of the station's bunk rooms, used by rangers during extended shifts. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that elongated silhouette watching me from the forest's edge, its body bent at impossible angles, its movements too fluid for something of its size. Around 2 a.m, I gave up on rest and limped to the window, staring out at the storm-lashed forest beyond the station's perimeter fence. The rain had finally begun to taper off, revealing patches of night sky between the clouds. Moonlight filtered down, casting the trees in silver and shadow. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed something that made my heart stutter. A tall figure standing just beyond the fence line, partially obscured by a massive oak tree. It remained perfectly still, its outline barely distinguishable from the surrounding forest. But I knew it was there, watching, waiting. I blinked, and it shifted position, now standing closer to the fence, its head tilted at an unnatural angle as if studying the building. Another blink, and it had moved again, its impossible speed defying physics. I stumbled back from the window, my injured ankle protesting as I put weight on it. Cold sweat broke out across my forehead as I fumbled for the light switch, flooding the small room with fluorescent brightness. Returning to the window, I saw nothing but empty forest. No figure, no movement beyond the gentle sway of branches in the dying wind. Had it been there at all, or was my mind conjuring phantoms from trauma and exhaustion? I didn't return to bed. Instead, I sat in a chair facing the door, my back to the wall, watching shadows pass beneath the gap as night staff moved through the hallway. Dawn couldn't come soon enough. Morning arrived with clear skies and birdsong, the storm having passed during the night. The forest beyond the station looked peaceful, benign, nothing like the nightmare landscape I'd fled hours earlier. Becca found me in the cafeteria, staring into a cup of untouched coffee. The dark circles under her eyes suggested she'd slept as poorly as I had. "Teams assembled," she said without preamble. "Sheriff's sending 2 deputies, and we've got 4 rangers plus a wildlife expert from the university. We head out in 30 minutes. I nodded, relief washing over me. In daylight, with a well-armed team, we could find answers, maybe even track the creature to its lair. "I want you to stay here," she added, crushing my momentary optimism. "What? No, I need to go. I know what we're looking for, where I found everything. You've marked all the locations on the map, and your ankle needs rest. Besides," she lowered her voice, "if this thing is what you say it is, you've already encountered it once. It might recognize you, target you specifically. I can't risk that." Her logic was sound, but frustration still bubbled inside me. "At least let me monitor radio communications from here. If something goes wrong, I can coordinate additional resources." Becca agreed to this compromise, and I spent the next hour helping the team prepare, transferring GPS coordinates, describing landmarks, explaining the strange tracks and territorial markings they should look for. The wildlife expert, Dr. Ramona Moss, listened with particular interest to my description of the creature. Rather than dismissing my account, she asked detailed questions about its movements, posture, and apparent physical characteristics. There are documented cases of unknown species existing in isolated pockets, she explained when I expressed surprise at her open-mindedness. The coelacanth was thought extinct for millions of years, until one turned up in a fishing net. Nature has many secrets she hasn't shared with science yet. Her words were meant to be reassuring, I think, but they only deepened my unease. If this thing was some undiscovered species, it had evolved to be a perfect predator, one that understood human behavior well enough to stalk and ambush us with terrifying efficiency. At 9:30 a.m., the team departed in 3 vehicles, loaded with equipment for both search and rescue and wildlife management. I watched them go from the station's front steps, fighting the nagging feeling that I was sending them into danger they couldn't possibly comprehend. Becca had set up a communications center in her office, where I could monitor the team's progress via radio and GPS tracking. For the first hour, everything proceeded smoothly. They reached the trailhead, located the initial campsite, and began following the same path I had taken the previous day. "Found the torn fabric exactly where you marked it," Becca's voice crackled over the radio. "And these tracks, they're like nothing I've ever seen." Ramona's taking casts. Relief flooded through me. Physical evidence meant I hadn't imagined it all, that something real had stalked me through those woods. The team continued to the abandoned camp I'd discovered, reporting the claw marks on trees, the scattered possessions, the journal exactly as I described them. With each confirmation, my credibility strengthened, but so did my concern for their safety. By noon, they had reached the location where I'd encountered the deer carcass. "Remains are still here," Becca reported, "but they've been disturbed further. More of the flesh is gone, and there are fresh tracks around the site." A chill ran down my spine. "Fresh tracks? From last night?" "Ramona thinks so. After the rain stopped, something returned to feed." The implication was clear. The creature was still active in the area, still hunting. "Be careful," I warned unnecessarily. "That thing moves fast, and it can cover a lot of ground quickly." "We're keeping tight formation, weapons ready," she assured me. "Heading toward the ravine where you spotted it on the bridge next." I tracked their progress on the GPS display, watching the cluster of dots move steadily through the forest. They reached the bridge without incident, finding nothing unusual beyond more of those distinctive tracks preserved in the mud. The next hour passed uneventfully, as the team methodically searched the area where I'd found the torn backpack and fallen camera. They recovered additional evidence: a broken walking stick, a shredded tent segment, a single shoe that matched the one I'd found. "We're going to push a bit further," Becca radioed. "There's a stream about half a mile ahead that creates a natural boundary. If our target is territorial, that might mark the edge of its range." I wanted to protest, to tell them they'd gone far enough, but I bit my tongue. They were professionals, well-armed and experienced, and daylight made the forest less threatening, the shadows less concealing. The team moved forward, their GPS markers showing steady progress toward the stream. Then, abruptly, one of the dots separated from the group, moving at an unusual angle. "Becca, you've got someone breaking formation," I radioed quickly. "Negative," she replied after a moment. "All personnel accounted for and together." I stared at the screen, confused. "I'm showing a marker moving northeast, away from your position." A pause. "That's impossible. Let me check." I watched as the rogue dot continued to move, its pace increasing as it headed deeper into the forest. Then, one by one, the other dots began to drift in different directions, creating a scattered pattern across the GPS display. "Becca, what's happening? Your team is dispersing." Static answered me, interspersed with fragments of voices. "Interference. Can't explain. Markers malfunctioning." Cold dread pooled in my stomach as I realized what was happening. The GPS system was being compromised somehow, the signals scattered or redirected to show movement that wasn't occurring. "Becca, your GPS is unreliable. I repeat, GPS tracking is compromised. Establish visual contact with all team members immediately." More static. Then her voice came through clearly. "Adrian, something's wrong. The equipment is malfunctioning. Compasses are spinning. GPS is scrambled. Even the radios are—" The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by a high-pitched electronic whine that made me rip the headset from my ears. When I cautiously replaced it, there was nothing but dead air. I tried every channel, calling for Becca, for any team member who could respond. Nothing. The GPS display now showed the dots randomly scattered across miles of forest, some moving at impossible speeds, others completely stationary. Panic rose in my throat as I grabbed my phone, dialing Becca's cell number. It rang once before going to voicemail, suggesting no signal in her location. I tried the sheriff's office next, explaining the situation in rushed, fragmented sentences. They promised to send additional personnel, but it would take time to mobilize, time the team might not have if my fears were justified. I made a decision then, one born of desperation and a deep certainty that waiting would only lead to more lives lost. My ankle still throbbed, but the swelling had reduced enough for me to walk. I changed into fresh ranger gear, packed emergency supplies, and grabbed a high-powered rifle from the station's armory. No one tried to stop me as I signed out a vehicle and headed back toward the forest. They had heard enough of my story, seen enough of the evidence to understand the urgency, or perhaps they simply recognized the determination in my eyes, the look of someone who wouldn't be dissuaded no matter what regulations were cited. As I drove back toward Mark Twain National Forest, the clear blue sky began to darken once more. Not with storm clouds this time, but with the approach of evening. I was racing against the setting sun, knowing that once darkness fell, the advantage would shift decisively to whatever hunted in those ancient woods. The same creature that was now, I feared, hunting my friends and colleagues. I reached the trailhead just as the sun dipped behind the western ridge, casting long shadows across the parking area. The team's vehicles sat empty, their equipment neatly stowed inside. A stark contrast to the chaos I imagined was unfolding deeper in the forest. My ankle protested as I geared up, strapping on a tactical vest loaded with flares, extra ammunition, first aid supplies, and emergency rations. I checked the rifle, ensured my sidearm was secure in its holster, and activated a personal locator beacon, a last resort if things went catastrophically wrong. The trail stretched before me, disappearing into the growing twilight. I clicked on my high-powered flashlight and started forward, moving as quickly as my injury allowed. Birds fell silent as darkness crept through the underbrush, replaced by the chorus of insects and the occasional hooting of an owl. I followed the team's tracks easily at first. Multiple boot prints pressed into the soft earth, along with occasional equipment drag marks. They had moved in formation, just as Becca had reported, maintaining the discipline of experienced professionals. Half a mile in, I reached the first campsite where everything had begun yesterday. The team had disturbed it further during their investigation, colored flags marking points of interest and evidence collection. I continued past it, my pace quickening as the last of the daylight faded from the sky. The air felt different tonight, heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. The forest seemed to press in around me, the spaces between trees darker than they should be, as if the darkness had substance rather than absence. I reached the location of the deer carcass, now removed by the team for further study. All that remained was a dark stain on the ground and the lingering smell of decay. My flashlight beam caught something new, however, fresh tracks leading away from the site, pressed into the soil after the team had departed. Not human tracks. Those same elongated, oddly proportioned footprints I'd seen yesterday, following the team's trail with apparent purpose. Cold certainty settled in my gut. The creature was tracking them, perhaps had been from the moment they entered its territory. The team's last transmission had come from near the stream, still a mile ahead. I needed to move faster. I broke into a jog, ignoring the stabbing pain in my ankle. The beam of my flashlight bounced erratically, creating disorienting shadows that seemed to move independently of the trees casting them. Twice I thought I saw movement in my periphery, but when I turned, found nothing but darkened forest. The bridge over the ravine appeared ahead, its wooden planks gleaming dully in my light. I slowed, approaching cautiously, remembering my encounter there the previous night. The structure seemed intact, no signs of struggle or violence. Halfway across, I paused to catch my breath. The creek below had subsided since the storm, now barely a trickle over smooth stones. In the silence, I heard something that made me freeze, a faint, rhythmic tapping from somewhere in the darkness ahead. I doused my flashlight, plunging myself into near-total darkness. My eyes adjusted slowly, revealing the silhouettes of trees against the slightly lighter sky. The tapping continued, steady and deliberate, like someone, or something, striking wood against wood. Moving silently now, I crept forward, using the ambient light to navigate. The sound grew louder as I approached, guiding me off the main trail and into a dense thicket of young pines. Through the branches I caught a glimpse of flickering light, not electric, but the warm glow of fire. Hope surged through me. The team must have established a camp, perhaps when their equipment failed. I moved faster, pushing through the undergrowth until I reached the edge of a small clearing. What I saw there stopped me cold. A campfire burned in the center of the clearing, but it wasn't the team gathered around it. 3 figures sat motionless, their backs to me, facing the flames. Their proportions were wrong, too tall, too thin, their spines curved in impossible ways. They wore no clothes, their skin a mottled texture that reminded me of tree bark or weathered leather. Between them, laid out on the ground like offerings, were items I recognized: a ranger's hat, a backpack, a jacket that looked like Becca's. The tapping sound came from one of the creatures, its elongated fingers striking a radio against a rock in rhythmic sequence. I eased backward, fighting the urge to flee immediately. I needed to know if the team was alive, if there was anyone to rescue. From my new position, I could see more of the clearing, including what appeared to be crude shelters constructed from branches and animal hides at its far edge. Movement caught my eye, something emerging from one of these shelters. Another creature, similar to the others but larger, dragging what I initially thought was a deer carcass. With horrified recognition, I realized it was a person, unconscious or dead, being pulled by their arms. The larger creature deposited its burden near the fire, and in the flickering light, I caught a glimpse of a uniform, one of the deputies who had accompanied the team. He wasn't moving, but I couldn't tell if he was breathing. My hand tightened on the rifle as I assessed the situation. 4 creatures that I could see, possibly more in the shelters. At least 1 human captive, status unknown. No sign of the others, which could mean they'd escaped, or had already met a worse fate. I needed to act, but charging in would be suicide. These things had taken down an entire team of armed professionals. My only advantage was surprise, and even that might not be enough. A plan formed in my mind, risky, desperate, but the only option I could see. I retreated further into the woods, circling the clearing until I reached the opposite side, closer to the shelters. From this angle I could make out more details of the creatures gathered around the fire. Their faces were the most disturbing part, almost human in structure but stretched and distorted, with sunken eye sockets and mouths that seemed too wide for their narrow heads. They communicated with each other through a series of clicks and low hums that bore no resemblance to human speech. I removed 2 flares from my vest, along with my lighter and a handful of emergency fire starters, chemical packets designed to ignite quickly and burn hot. If these things lived in the forest, perhaps they feared its most destructive element. Selecting a patch of dry underbrush about 50 yards from the clearing, I arranged the fire starters and surrounded them with dead leaves and small branches. It wouldn't create a forest fire, the ground was still too damp from yesterday's rain, but it would create a diversion. I struck the lighter, igniting the chemical packets. They flared immediately, setting the surrounding tinder ablaze. I added larger sticks, building the fire quickly before retreating. Once at a safe distance, I ignited the first flare and threw it high over the trees, where it burst into brilliant red light, illuminating the forest like a miniature sun. The reaction from the clearing was immediate. Harsh, guttural cries and the sound of rapid movement. I circled back toward my diversion fire, which had grown considerably, flames now reaching toward the lower branches of nearby trees. I ignited the second flare and threw it directly into the growing blaze, causing a shower of sparks and an intense flare of light. Then I moved quickly toward the clearing, rifle ready. The creatures had scattered, 3 of them loping toward the diversion on those unnaturally long limbs. The 4th, the largest one, remained near the fire, crouched protectively over the fallen deputy. I took aim and fired, the rifle's report shattering the night silence. The creature jerked as the bullet struck its shoulder, letting out a high-pitched scream that sounded nothing like any animal I'd ever heard. It spun toward me, revealing pupil-less eyes that reflected the firelight like oil slicks. I fired again, aiming for its chest. The creature staggered but didn't fall. Instead, it charged, covering the distance between us with terrifying speed. I emptied the magazine, each impact slowing it but somehow not stopping its advance. At the last moment, I drew my sidearm and fired point-blank into its face as it reached for me. The creature finally collapsed, its body convulsing briefly before going still. The stench that rose from it was overwhelming, a mixture of rotting vegetation, stagnant water, and something else, something chemical and alien. I had no time to examine it. The other creatures would return soon, drawn by the gunfire and their fallen companion. I rushed to the deputy, finding him unconscious but alive, his pulse weak but steady. "Adams," I shook him gently. "Deputy Adams, can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered, but didn't open. A quick examination revealed no obvious injuries beyond a large contusion on his temple. They had taken him alive, for reasons I didn't want to contemplate. "I'm getting you out of here," I muttered, hoisting him into a fireman's carry, despite my protesting ankle. His weight nearly buckled my injured leg, but adrenaline kept me upright. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye, a familiar shape half buried beneath debris near one of the shelters. Becca's distinctive red backpack, still partially packed with equipment. I staggered toward it, shifting Adams's weight to maintain balance. Inside the pack, I found her journal, her personal locator beacon, and a folded map with handwritten notes. I stuffed these into my vest before noticing something else, a narrow opening behind the shelter, descending into darkness like the entrance to a burrow or cave. From that opening came sounds, faint moans that might be human, mixed with those same clicking communications I'd heard from the creatures. More captives, possibly the rest of the team, held somewhere beneath the forest floor. Agonizing indecision froze me in place. I couldn't leave potential survivors behind, but Adams needed immediate medical attention, and I couldn't fight those things while carrying him. The decision was made for me as distant howls signaled the return of the other creatures. They had discovered their fallen companion or the diversion, possibly both. I had minutes at most before they descended on the clearing. "I'll come back," I promised quietly, to whoever might be trapped below, before turning and carrying Adams into the forest as quickly as my burdened body would allow. The journey back was a nightmare of exhaustion, pain, and constant fear. Every snapping twig became a pursuing creature, every shadow a potential ambush. I avoided the trails, instead plotting a direct course through the wilderness toward the road, using the stars for navigation now that the sky had cleared. Adam stirred occasionally, but never fully regained consciousness. His breathing remained steady, which I took as a positive sign. Whatever these creatures were, they seemed to want their captives alive, at least initially. After what felt like hours of tortuous progress, I glimpsed the reflective markers at the forest's edge that indicated the main road. My strength was failing, my ankle a throbbing mass of pain, but the sight gave me a final surge of energy. I broke through the tree line just as headlights appeared around a bend, the sheriff's backup team finally arriving. I collapsed to my knees, still clutching Adams as vehicles screeched to a halt and uniformed officers poured out, weapons drawn. "There are more," I gasped as they reached us. "Still in there, underground." The next hours passed in a blur of medical attention, debriefing and mounting rescue operations. I described the clearing, the shelters, the underground entrance in as much detail as I could remember. Maps were consulted, strategies formed, additional resources called in from neighboring counties. By dawn, a full-scale operation was underway. Not just search and rescue, but tactical teams equipped for hostage recovery. I watched from a command vehicle, my ankle properly bandaged, as dozens of armed personnel disappeared into the forest that had nearly claimed my life. They found the clearing exactly where I'd described it, the body of the creature I'd killed still lying where it had fallen. Scientific teams descended on it immediately, their initial reports suggesting nothing even close to a known species, a biological impossibility that somehow existed anyway. The underground entrance led to a network of tunnels extending deep beneath the forest floor, some apparently natural, others clearly excavated. Within these passages, they found 4 survivors from our team, including Becca, all unconscious but alive, showing similar contusions to Adam's. They also found human remains, dozens of them in various states of decay, some recent, others reduced to bones that carbon dating would later reveal to be decades or even centuries old. The creatures had been hunting in these woods for generations, taking their prey below ground for purposes we still don't fully understand. The last of the creatures was cornered in the deepest part of the tunnel network, 7 in total, all similar to the one I'd encountered, all displaying that same impossible biology that defied classification. They fought with surprising intelligence and coordination, but were ultimately overwhelmed by superior numbers and firepower. In the aftermath, the official explanation given to the public was that a previously undocumented predator species had been discovered and neutralized. The more disturbing details, the human-like aspects of the creatures, their apparent intelligence, the centuries of predation, were classified and contained within agencies equipped to study such anomalies. Adams recovered fully, though, like the others rescued from the tunnels, he retained no memory of his capture or captivity. The gap in their recollections was deemed a blessing by the psychologists who evaluated them. I wasn't so fortunate. My memories remained intact, vivid, and haunting. The images of those elongated figures moving through the trees, their oil-slick eyes reflecting firelight, their bodies bent at impossible angles. These things visited me nightly for months afterward. Eventually, I transferred to another district, another forest. The official reason was my injured ankle, which never fully healed, leaving me with a permanent limp that ended my field career. The truth was simpler. I couldn't look at those trees without seeing shadows moving between them, couldn't hear the wind without catching hints of that clicking communication. 5 years have passed since that night in Mark Twain National Forest. I work a desk job now, coordinating search and rescue operations rather than participating in them. My experience has made me particularly attentive to certain patterns in missing persons reports. Clusters of disappearances in remote areas, abandoned equipment with no signs of the owners, unusual tracks or markings that field agents can't identify. Most turn out to be ordinary, explicable tragedies. Hikers who wandered off trails, campers who underestimated the weather, predators of the 4-legged variety claiming occasional victims. But sometimes, rarely, I see something in the reports that raises the hair on my neck, details that echo my experience in those dark woods. When that happens, I make calls to certain agencies, people who were there that night, or who have been briefed on what we found. Because while we eliminated the creatures from Mark Twain Forest, none of us believed they were unique or isolated. The tunnels extended for miles, with branches that collapsed or were blocked before they could be fully explored. The forest is vast, ancient, and full of shadows. What we encountered may have been just one colony, one nest of something that has existed alongside humanity for centuries, watching us from the darkness between trees. I still hike occasionally, always in daylight, always in well-traveled areas. But I never venture deep into the woods anymore. And when night falls, I make sure I'm safely indoors, away from the ancient spaces where things with oil-slick eyes and bark-like skin might move silently between trees, watching for those who stray too far from the trail, because the echoes of frantic screams still ring in my ears. The memory of that clearing has haunted me every time I close my eyes. One moment, everything was calm, just the hum of the forest and my own footsteps. The next, I was face to face with something savage, its presence revealed by the carnage it left behind. There was no denying that I'd uncovered a horrifying secret in Mark Twain National Forest. And sometimes, in my darkest moments, I fear it's only a matter of time before someone else does too.